Give notice of the date, time, and location of its meetings other than special, emergency, or continued meetings at least 3 working days in advance by posting such notice on its official public government website, placing such notice in a prominent public location at which notices are regularly posted, and placing such notice at the office of the clerk of the public body, or in the case of a public body that has no clerk, at the office of the chief administrator. Reasonable notice under the circumstances of a special, emergency, or continued meeting shall be given contemporaneously with the notice provided to the members of the policy body conducting the meeting. Ms. Tanner.
Yes, Dr. Gabriel. This meeting was in compliance as of June 27th. Notice was provided fulfilling all criteria of VA Code Chapter 37.
Great, thank you. I duly call this meeting to order. Ms. Tanner, can you please call the roll?
Here.
Present.
Here.
Martin.
Here. Here.
Here.
Present. Thank you very much. We have a very full schedule today, but before we begin, I would just like to commend Dr. Birdsong, Mr. Hazelette, Dr. Cataldo, Ms. Goshen for a wonderful presentation yesterday. We had our first joint city council and school board meeting, and I would like to commend you all on the presentation and the work that you all did yesterday. Thank you very much. Our first topic of discussion today is our student learning and achievement. Dr. Birdsong.
Good afternoon, Dr. Gabriel, Mr. Clanton, members of the board. We are prepared today to share some data with you, student achievement data. We have compiled ESSA data for you as well as data from our growth model. We have a variety of presenters today. Dr. Cataldo is going to lead the discussion. With him, we have Gwen Collins, our reading coordinator, and Rhonda White will also join him at certain times throughout the presentation to give us an update on our mathematics data. We have spent a lot of time on this presentation, and I know that some of you may want the data presented in different formats and styles, and please know that we are willing to do that. But today we are positioned to provide you the data in the format that you have in your packets, and again, we're happy to present it in other ways. If you would like that, we're happy to do that. So without further ado, Dr. Cataldo, if you would come forward too, and I think we're going to start with English, so you might want to have Ms. Collins come up with you as well.
Dr. Bailey?
Okay, Dr.
Dr.
Bailey
Bailey.
first? All right.
Then I think we'll have English.
Dr. Gabriel, Dr. Burson, as they're presenting, I just one request. On the board docs, there are documents that we received that are listed in the executive content. Can we move those to the public content?
Yes.
So I think it's public data.
Yes, absolutely. Ms. Tanner, do you think you can work to do that? Great.
You all set? Okay. Good afternoon, Dr. Birdsong, Dr. Gabriel, members of the board. We're very excited today to talk about today's academic data update. We're going to I'm going to just give an overall preview of what you'll be hearing tonight, today from members of Curriculum Instruction and ARA, Dr. Bailey. Our first slide, as we kind of go through the presentation, has the school board accountability plan. And the accountability plan is what drives our priorities and desired outcomes that you all have determined. Dr. Bailey is going to discuss accreditation information as well, school quality indicators, a summary, and also percent of our accredited schools. We will go through each of our core areas, English, math, science, social studies, and provide subject data with district and building level implications as well. We'll provide subgroup data and gap group data and talk about what the research says about gap data and how we can close that achievement gap that is really one of our driving areas. We'll also discuss non-negotiables and, most importantly, what our next steps are based on the data that we had from this past school year. We will discuss what worked well last year and also what is new for this upcoming school year, again, in each of our core areas. You'll also hear about STAR reading, STAR math, and STAR early literacy, which really shows how consistently our students are moving forward in relation to overall literacy. We really feel that STAR literacy and STAR Renaissance provides us that information 3 times a year, beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year. And what you'll see when you look at this data that we'll be showing you, you'll see that it does progress and students are improving from the different benchmark points. The SOL tests are done once a year, so it's a little more difficult. You don't get that pre and that post other than the previous year. So we really feel that STAR data is a better reflection of how our students are performing and how they are doing in literacy in both math, reading, and in early literacy. So for our next slide will be accreditation information. And Dr. Bailey.
Thank you, Dr. Cataldo, Dr. Gabriel, and Dr. Birdsong, and members of the board. Thank you for this opportunity. Certainly, we have given you reports within the last couple of months to inform you about our SOL progress and a glimpse of our accreditation. And so we feel that what we shared with you preliminary, we're kind of 99% accurate when we compare to the final results. So I feel pretty good about that. I would like to thank my staff who really worked hard on that. Certainly, the accreditation, the new model of the accreditation is a way for the state to have districts to focus on certain areas for school improvement and to look at equity among our schools. The 3 major areas that are in the accountability are achievement of all students, which you've gotten a wealth of data on, but also the achievement gaps, which we have shared with you. The gaps are a little bit different than how we traditionally talk about them, such as if we wanted to look at economically disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged. The gaps that the state shares with us, the intent is for us to look at how far they are from the benchmark of 75% and 70% in the other area. The other indicators are the student engagement indicators. Chronic absenteeism, graduation completion index, dropout, and the college career readiness indicator. That particular indicator will not really appear, even though we see the results of that, will not really count until 2 or 3 more years from now. However, the other indicators have different formulas. So with respect to graduation and dropout, there's 2 other formulas compared to the one that we're using with respect to accreditation. Our results yield 29 out of 43 schools that have been fully accredited. We had a shift in our denominator, which is the removal of Poplar Halls, if you recall that. Our paired schools are counted in this as well. Some people feel that they're not really testing, but their other paired school is. And so it is required, any school that has kindergarten through 2nd grade has to be paired with a testing school. And so that's why that is done. Currently, we have 3 levels of accreditation. You can be accredited with conditions, or accreditation denied. The state only provides the accreditation denied, and that is if you have not followed your improvement guidelines throughout the year to improve student achievement. The other areas are grayed out, but just to let you know, those were the other areas in prior years that made it a lot more complex when looking at this information.
But Doctor, I don't want to stop you, but I just want to point out that we don't have any accredited denied.
Right, we do not have any schools that have been identified as accreditation denied. We feel really good about that. A lot of our schools have worked very hard to show growth. A lot of our teachers have worked very hard as well. This gives you another view of the number of our schools being fully accredited. We have progressed to 67%. You can see our progress over time. The red line indicates the difference, the change in the methodology to be fully accredited. And so when we talk about accreditation, it is the school year. When we talk about the data, it's the previous year's data. So that's why it's been indicated here. Any questions at this point? No? Okay, so therefore, I'm going to transition over to Ms. Gwen Collins, who will talk to you about the English data.
Right here. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about the English data. This thing, there we go. And as you can see, this is a longitudinal look at the essay data. So those are the numbers that we're looking at. And MPS is our highest year when you look at essay data was the 2016-17 school year. However, for the 17-18 school year, grade 3, grade 6, and overall writing were highest for that year. And then last year, we had dips anywhere from a decrease in pass rates from anywhere from 1% to 6%. And the next slide is actually our combined growth. So this includes not only the ESSA percent pass, which is that raw score, but it also includes our adjusted rate and then any growth that was here. And so you can see in 2017-18, we have some of our highest scores that we've had with these 2010 English standards. And last year, we were at 75% overall pass rate, and I'd also like to note that grade 4, grade 7, and end of course reading hit the 75% or higher, which is, in reading and writing, it's a 75% pass rate. So that is and we're proud of the growth that we are seeing in our students with regards to reading. Yes. Here we go. So another data point that we look at is the student data by question reports. And so ARA puts these together for us across the district. So we can actually comb through these data reports from grade 3 all the way to end of course. And in reading and writing, the reporting categories are the same. So in third through end of course, there's 3 reporting categories. We're looking at demonstrating the comprehension of fiction text, comprehension of nonfiction text, and then how we use word analysis strategy and word reference materials in reading. And then in writing, they're based on research, composing, and written expression, and then separated out is mechanics and usage. The numbers that are highlighted in blue show strengths across the district. And one thing that I think, this helps us determine next steps, what things we need to add to the curriculum, where we maybe need to provide PD for teachers. And you can see that 3rd through 5th grade, we have our strength is in word analysis. And then in 7th through end of course, we have a strength in nonfiction. 6th grade's kind of flat, 56 and 55% on those questions. What we're very excited to see in the upper grades that nonfiction is a strength. That is usually the opposite case. It's usually that nonfiction is not a strength, and we feel that this is indicative of how we have changed the curriculum, K-12, to include thematic units so that each one of our units contains fiction and nonfiction text at the same time, and students are reading those together around different themes with each unit. So we feel like that has really made a difference to the correlation between fiction and nonfiction.
Before you go on, I have a point of clarification, Dr. Bertzoni, if I may. What do these percentages tell us? Is it 58% of what? I'm just looking at grade 3.
What that means is in 3rd grade, for demonstrating comprehension of fictional text, that 58% of our 3rd graders answered any question about fiction correctly. And so it's hard to read up there, 58% answered any question about nonfiction correctly. So that's where those numbers come from.
Okay.
So it kind of gives us a gauge of what questions they're answering correctly within the genre, and then we can actually dig this data down even deeper, and we don't have that here for you, but for example, when we look at drawing conclusions across the district, in fiction, it's much stronger than in nonfiction, and so that has made us adjust our pacing and instructional resources to start to think about, okay, we need to be reading more nonfiction, giving students opportunities to draw conclusions within that nonfiction, and how can we take that out to cross-curricular? So bring history and science into that conversation as well when students are in those content classes.
Is there a target that you're shooting for within the English department to say we would like to have this percentage of students achieving or comprehending this percentage?
And I think our target is 75%. We
Okay.
want to be at that 75%.
Okay.
You know, to look that everybody is, and of course, we would want that to move up once we hit that 75%, but that's really what we're,
So we'd say at least 75%.
at least a minimum, right?
That's the state benchmark, 75?
The state doesn't put, 75% is the state
Yeah.
benchmark for pass rate, right, for reading and writing, but they do not put a benchmark
Right, for
on
this.
these numbers.
But you're saying 75 is the internal one?
Right.
Okay.
So, but if I may, going back to the longitudinal SOL English data essay, the determination between the red and the green is, are we using 75% as the?
Yes, so any scores that are in green hit the 75% mark or above, and anything in red is below that, and that's actually consistent throughout our presentation. So all content will have those same, you know, color identifiers as well.
I guess when I look at this for 2018-19, and I know there's been some discussion about literacy English as a whole, but when we look at here, this, you know, that I made the point that saying that we didn't have any accreditation denied, but then there are areas that I guess, that we have to really pay attention to. And of course, and I've heard Dr. Birdsong mention this, that, you know, we're teaching individuals to read, and then you get to third grade and it's like, you know, you got to be able to read to learn.
Right.
And so when we're looking at 2018-19, and I see so much in red below the 75
I see it.
benchmark, I hope that even in this presentation, that we're having something solid to say that we've identified that may have been issues, and what are we looking to do better this particular year.
Oh, I have definite things that we have, those are in our next steps that
Perfect.
we'll get to, that we, you know, and I completely agree. K-2 is the foundation of the school system, and we have to teach our students how to become proficient readers before they enter third grade.
And so, Mr. Clanton, we are prepared to talk about division-level strategies as well as classroom instruction, what that should look like.
Oh, no, I'm great.
Ms. Smith?
So is that also going to address what we see here with grades 3 through 4? Use word analysis, they're doing quite well, but then when you look at 6, 7, and 8, there's a drop. So
Right.
my expectation would be as our students move through the system, that whatever they're receiving at the K through 3 level, we're building upon it when they reach the next level, and that we would see similar, if not higher, scores at the next level.
So, to get in the curriculum weeds, there's a huge change in word analysis when you get to 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, where it's the rigor of the standard is much higher, and the expectations of students being able to use roots and affixes about words that they know and determine meaning with words that they may not understand. And so, for example, like synonyms and antonyms, they need to dive into the text, understand what an unknown word is, and then be able to determine what the synonym or antonym is of that unknown word, and maybe not just one synonym or antonym, but there's a list there that they have to choose through. So we're very, you know, this is telling for us as well to say what kinds of things do we need to put in place in middle school so that we can continue that upward trend for word analysis.
And are we not preparing them at the lower level to do just that? What you're saying with the synonyms and antonyms? Wouldn't what we prepare them for, the instructions that we provide for them, the students, at grade level, let's say 5, shouldn't that be a foundation for what what's going to be introduced to them at 6.
Yes.
And 6 should have a foundation for 7.
And I think that when they get into, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that when they get to the portions of the non-negotiables and the classroom instruction, that's one of the points that you were going to be discussing.
Definitely. I'd also just like to add one piece to that. So the K-12, I was at a VDOE meeting on Monday and discussing things exactly around this. And one thing in reading, our curriculum is K-12. It scaffolds itself constantly, but that is also what you have to take into account is reading proficiency and what grade level a student is reading on to then determine what they can actually begin to read. So I think one of the things that we're really trying to focus on is closing that gap in the younger years, so those foundational years, so we're not getting to 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade and reading 3 and 4 years behind grade level. And so that kind of adds a whole nother piece to our reading data.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Ms. Campson?
Could I make a fast suggestion? Because I know that we gave them a timeline for their presentation, leaving a nice block for Q&A.
Yeah.
So perhaps if we could let them do the presentation, then
Yeah.
we would have that time, because if we start stopping them on every few slides, their time will run out.
Yeah. Go ahead and proceed.
Okay. So that is our student data by question. And the nice thing about this report is schools can actually drill this down, not only to a whole grade level in a school, but they can look at that. Then they can drill down to classroom teachers and then directly to the students and what their strengths and weaknesses are as well. So how do we use this data? We talked a little bit about how we use this data. The first thing that we do is that we adjust our pacing, we create assessments, we develop resources to target strands, just like I talked about drawing conclusions. We had PDs in August that were directly related to weaknesses that were in our SDBQ report. We also collaborate with school level administrators and department chairs and reading specialists and Title I teachers to help them develop support plans and to build their capacity on how to analyze. And the next bullet down, to triangulate data with other data sources that we have. And not only STAR, but then we have many literacy assessments that help us drive instruction as well, that we can use all of that data to look at where our students are and what are our next steps that we need to do. And then this report, as I said a minute ago, there are also building level implications as well. And so at the building level, they use these reports to target cohorts of students and what those students need, and then also to target cohorts of teachers and grade levels to determine, okay, as a grade level, we did not do, drawing conclusions was not one of our strengths. What can we reflect on and do differently this year that we did not do last year?
Okay.
And then we, the building reading leader, so when I say building reading leader, I think of a reading specialist or a department chair and the principal. They can use this information to determine the effectiveness of instruction, develop support plans, and then revise those support plans as more data comes in, because you constantly have to look at the data.
So as we begin to also look at the ESSA mathematics data, as Gwen just stated, this longitudinal look at data is the ESSA for math. As you can see, NPS overall, we gained 6 points. The state gained only 5 points, so I'd like to celebrate that. But important to point out that 17-18 was our crosswalk year. So this was a year that teachers, they actually had as a part of their pacing and their instruction 2 curricula. So they had 2009 standards and 2016 standards. Last year was the first year of our full implementation of our 2016 standards, and in the spring, they were assessed for the first time. few things to really point out about that. They were new standards, so we're looking at 2 sets of standards from one year to another. But we're also looking at a test that was developed using a different format. The format of this test used universal design language, in which it minimized any language that would be an obstacle for students to understand the mathematics involved. We also want to value the combined rates, and I think this just shows the hard work that our teachers put into really digging into looking at the Tier 1, thinking about what the instruction should look like, aligning their efforts, and our support helping them to align their instruction to what VDOE was saying was going to be assessed in the SOLs. And as you look at it, there are a couple of grade levels that just jump out as having 13-point gains, grade 3 and grade 7. And I'd just like to also point out the note at the bottom, and it speaks to the fact that the grade 8 assessment is taken by students in grades 6, 7, and 8th grade. The Algebra 1 assessment is taken by select students in 7th, 8th, and high school students. And the geometry assessment may be taken by students that are in 8th grade or in high school. Again, as Gwen shared, the SDBQ has several purposes. It really helps us to look at our strengths and our weaknesses as a district, and then we can also translate that down to buildings. But as we're looking at the math data, you'll notice that the categories are very different from grade bands, but we also still see some consistency, so we are able to have those vertical conversations. For example, we can begin to look at the number sense as being one of the stronger categories from grades 5 through 8, and then we can think about what are our efforts around that. Our efforts have been over the past few years focusing on increasing number sense, thinking about numeracy K2. So we're starting to see those efforts pay off, and we want to just dig deeper into those efforts. We can also begin to have conversations about the fact that measurement and geometry still seems to lag behind, so we can begin to think about our pacing, our resources that are available for that. And as Gwen said, we use this for several reasons in the building level. And so I would like to just add on to that. As we are looking at it from a district level, we also can look at the frequency of types of items, and then we can make sure that our own assessments are aligned to that as well. So we're looking at not just the performance, but also the frequency of the types of items to make sure that we're assessing along the same lines and blueprint as the state. This can take effect in our DBAs and other assessments. And as we're looking at the support plans that we put in place for buildings, we can dig into the building level data, and we can look for those places that need more support. So being equitable with our support into buildings. We can look at the data, and we can look at specific strands, and we can say, well, when measurement and geometry comes up for certain buildings, they're going to need us more than others. So we'll make sure and we'll schedule more of our support days there to be available to those buildings. In addition, one thing that we did last year in the math department, we had to create additional study guides for specific strands and be able to offer those for teachers and for students as well. And we're continuing that work this year. We also look at this data, and we look for teachers who are performing well. Their students are performing well, and we ask them, what are you doing in your classrooms? How are you organizing your units? And can you share that? And they become leaders, and they become mentors for other teachers in other buildings. So we use these reports for that as well at a district level. As we're working with buildings to really triangulate this report along with STAR, along with DBAs, we not only use our math specialists to look for teachers that we can support and that we can support them in supporting, but we also work with our Title I teachers to decide on the areas and the students that they need to focus their support on. And our departments actually work with the Title I teachers to help and make sure that they're trained with those interventions to be able to actually help the students.
Now we're going to look at student subgroup data. And so this is along the lines of priority 1, where we want to increase the percentage of schools earning full accreditation. And the way these these charts are broken down is you have the reading data along with the subgroups, and then what the MPS board targets are, and then what the actual scores were for the 2018-19 school year, and if we met those benchmarks or not. And so as you can see that we met the benchmark with our subgroup of Asian students, and we did not meet the benchmark with our other subgroups. However, important to note is that the benchmark is 75%, and so we did meet the benchmark with also our subgroup of white students with regards to reading. And then writing is the next slide. There we go. And writing is also at 75%. That's our target. And so we met the subgroup benchmark for our Asian students along, that was the one subgroup that we met. And then our white students also met the benchmark, but they did not meet the MPS school board benchmark.
So in math, our target is 70%, and we were able to increase the overall performance, but also for every subgroup, we were able to increase over last year, over their performance from last year. As we're looking at meeting the targets from the school board, we were able to meet the targets in everything, and with every group except for students with disabilities and the English learners.
And Adrian Day, our coordinate, Adrian Day, Britain, I'm sorry, flashback. All good people. Our science coordinator, and Mr. Bruce Brady, who is our acting executive director of curriculum instruction. I apologize, Ms. Britton.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Gabriel, Mr. Clanton, Dr. Birdsong, and other board members. As we see here on this slide, the state benchmark for science is 70%, and then we have the board targets listed for each subgroup listed, and you'll see that for science, the target was met for Asian and white students only. You'll see that gifted and military indicated that are as well, and these were areas noted from the accountability plan, and we'll begin to monitor that, collect that data and monitor as well.
All right, good afternoon. In the next section, what we've done is we've pulled out each subgroup, and we're going to show you the gap for that particular subgroup across all of the content areas, and whether or not they reach the target, the school board target, for the gap for that particular subgroup. And as we'll see, we've met, in nearly all cases, the school board's target for that subgroup in that particular content area. What's also very interesting, and we started to see as we grouped each subgroup within a content area, is that regardless of the content, whether it was math or science or history, the achievement gap is very similar across all of those content areas for that particular subgroup, which also aligned with what we've been reading, and that is that the gap is not unique to a particular content area for that particular subgroup. All right? And so when it comes to black students, you can see with the reading, excuse me, the writing, also over to math, science, and history, all of the school board targets were met, and you can see also that range is kind of tight there. Varies between 22 points and 30 points for black students across all of those content areas. Moving forward, students with disabilities, again, all targets, all school board targets were met in reading, writing, as well as for math, science, and history. And again, the gap, very similar, ranging from 24 to 29 points for students with disabilities. For economically disadvantaged, again, all baseline targets were met for the year. And the range here, first of all, the gaps weren't as large, but the range was between 5 and 9 points for reading, writing, math, science, and history. For English learners, all targets were met with the exception of writing. But the range here was wider. Math, not quite the range there. The others a little more similar with the other content areas. Okay. For our military-connected students, all targets were exceeded as our military-connected students outperformed our non-military connected students in all of our content areas, reading, writing, and math, science, and history. As we've been looking at achievement gaps and preparing to move forward into the school year, we wanted to share what the research says about achievement gaps. And as we've looked at this over the last month or so, taking a look at what research is available on closing achievement gaps, for those of you who have been around for a while, it became like a little walk through Norfolk Public Schools history, because the folks who came up as the leading researchers in closing achievement gaps were folks that we were very, very familiar with in this district 15 to 20 years ago. There are people who are still at the forefront of increasing achievement still today, as they were a couple decades ago when they had so much influence in Norfolk Public Schools and what we were doing and how we were doing it. Doug Reeves worked extensively with Norfolk Public Schools 15, 20 years ago in his work with the 90-90-90 schools. And if you're not familiar with that, these were schools that had 90% minority enrollment, 90% free and reduced lunch, and 90th percentile when it came to achievement testing. Doug Reeves was here often in Norfolk, providing PD and working to increase student achievement. I think we all probably learned from Mike Schmoker's book at the time, Results, on how to collaborate in teams and looking at data. We implemented back then Richard Marzano's research-based strategies for increasing student achievement. As we introduced or implemented similarities and differences, justifications, non-linguistic representations, summarizing, providing feedback, among others, again, had a profound impact on what we were doing and how we were doing it. We've looked at the Hanover research that's been done, and also the Education Trust, their work in closing the achievement gap. And I recall a Norfolk High School in the fall of 2005 going to an Education Trust conference and being awarded a Dispelling the Myth award on their closing of the achievement gaps. And what we have found is that what they promoted then is still at the forefront of the research today. That the key to student achievement and this hasn't changed, is effective instruction. That effective instruction, effective Tier 1 instruction impacts all student groups, right? And that's everybody, all groups. And we had a slogan back then that all means all, and that was during this time period. So what we're finding is that there isn't a strategy for increasing achievement with black students and a different strategy for white students. There's not one strategy for increasing student achievement for economically disadvantaged students and a different strategy for non-economically disadvantaged students. It's effective Tier 1 instruction that will increase student achievement. Schmoker points out in his new book called Elevating the Essentials, which curriculum instruction will be reading in the next couple months, points out, he says, quote, effective teaching and curriculum obliterated the socioeconomic factors for students. Goes on to say that his 3 essentials for elevating the essentials, coherent curriculum, sound lessons, and authentic literacy, quote, wholly redefine what schools can accomplish with children from every socioeconomic stratum. Doug Reeves, in the work with the 90-90-90 schools, said that none used a specific program or any other proprietary model in order to achieve success. And so going back, the 5 characteristics that Doug Reeves pointed out that was true of the schools that had eliminated those gaps but increased achievement for all was a focus on academic achievement, was an emphasis on the core skills of reading, writing, and math. It included frequent written assessment and multiple opportunities for improvement. His most common characteristic that he found in those 90-90-90 schools was an emphasis on nonfiction writing and the collaborative scoring of student work. So there are themes that run through all of these researchers about teacher collaboration, structurally sound lessons, writing in all disciplines, high yield strategies, and most of all, rigor for all students and high expectations for all students, no matter the group, no matter their economic background, no matter the color of their skin. Those high expectations and exposure to rigorous curriculum increases achievement for all students, right? And it's not what, well, these students can't, right? It has to be our students will achieve, and achieve greatly by implementing these proven high-yield strategies that have been around for a while, but are effective. And so as we move forward to increase achievement for all students, we will be requiring reading, writing, critical thinking daily in all core classes. Right? Literacy, increasing reading and writing achievement is not the sole responsibility of Ms. Collins in the English office. We all play a role in that. Students need to be reading and writing and critically thinking in science, in history, and math, in all subject areas. And that's what will be taking place. We'll be using data to determine the effectiveness of that instruction, determining what needs reteaching, right, and to which students, right, to giving them multiple opportunities to achieve, right? And so in moving forward, I'd like to bring content coordinators back up to go over with you their next steps, right, in moving forward.
So then the next steps in English. Thank you. Okay, one of the things that, first, we're looking at this with what worked well, what we think worked well, and then what's new for this school year, what things we have put in place for the 1920 school year. And so the first piece we have is that we've worked hard to define and monitor and provide feedback regarding the components of our reading block. And so we now feel we have a structurally sound reading block, which includes explicit and direct instruction with guided and independent practice. And so that's the first thing that we feel like has worked well. The other piece is that we as an English department have really focused last year on the stages of literacy development, and that's where a student is in their reading, writing, and word study, and looking at all the data points of those three things and how we provide instruction to them. This is very important to K2, because that is a piece where we, I have urgency in that our kindergarten through second grade students need to leave second grade reading on or close to third grade level. We want them walking in prepared to be able to begin to read to learn. And so we feel focusing on the stages of literacy development is helping us move in that direction. We have a Teachers of Struggling Readers Academy going on right now. I was there this morning, and this was the focus of that academy. The University of Virginia provides that PD for us, and it's like a mini reading degree for our teachers. And so that's one piece to that stages of literacy development, which is actually also part of what's new, where we're digging deeper into those pieces. Additionally, we have created and implemented a curriculum that is now thematically based. And so K-12, there are 2 units per 9 weeks, and each one of those units covers fiction and nonfiction text, along with a writing piece that goes with that as well. So that's been a shift, because in the past we would focus solely on fiction and then solely on nonfiction and not bring those two together. And I discussed that a little bit earlier. And additionally, my office, we have created a mentor program for reading specialists. Last year, we had 14 out of our 30 reading specialists that had less than 3 years' experience as a reading specialist, not as a classroom teacher, but as a reading specialist. And so we need to put some things in place for them so that they understand their responsibilities in their schools, how they can coach teachers. And our mentor program is all about coaching, about problem solving with them, modeling for them, helping them provide PD, helping them dig into the data with their teachers and determine next steps for students and teachers as well. This year, we graduated 7 of those that now have 4 years experience. We have a small group of 7 reading specialists that are in our mentor program. And for this school year, 1920-20, the first bullet that I'm very excited to talk about is that we are now we have implemented some non-negotiables in English instruction, and we have begun to share those out, where this is actually part of the literacy plan. And so we rolled out our first non-negotiable, which is independent reading, and that's our whole Read 14.2. The idea behind independent reading is that we cannot expect our students to get better at reading if we never give them opportunities to read on their own and to use all the skills and strategies that they're learning in a text that they're reading. And so this is a place where we can start to, we're building classroom libraries around this piece. There is lots of research out there about students need access to books. They need access to books with students that look like them and think like them and live in places like they live in. And so we are really focusing on helping schools build classroom libraries, what types of books should be in those classroom libraries, that our students are reading authentic text and have authentic literacy experiences, that there is choice, and that there's time to do that. So that Read 14.2 independent reading is one of our first non-negotiables that we're rolling out. Others are also, making your thinking visible, making sure that you're annotating text as you read. Think with a pencil in hand. It could be sketchnoting. And then we have got to require our students to provide textual evidence for their answers. And so that's just another component of our non-negotiables. Along with that non-negotiable comes the next bullet, which is that my office is now providing, we are facilitating monthly professional development with administrators. So last week was my first round of intense PD. It was all on classroom libraries and independent reading, and what the expectation is with that. We start with the data, to look at the data to see where, when we have students, we look at our English data and we see that, it's in the 60s, it's in the red, it's below 75. It is a concern, and I directly align that to our students need to be reading more. We've got to make sure that that is happening. So at our principals meeting and our assistant principals meeting, I was able to focus on that, talk about the what, the why, and the how of independent reading, what it should look like across classrooms. We actually gave them a look-for tool and a monitoring tool that they can do a quick walkthrough of their schools and look to see, in our English classrooms, do we have classroom libraries? If we don't, what kinds of supports can we put in place? This isn't an expectation of a classroom teacher, but I look at it as an expectation of the district to provide books for our students in our classrooms. And so that's kind of the first layer of that. And my office is also doing we're monitoring all the classroom libraries right now to kind of get a point of where are we with classroom libraries. Do our students have access to books? Do our teachers have access to culturally diverse books that we can make sure that are in front of our students? And so we also are working a little bit differently in our office this year with the way that we are building the capacity of reading specialists and department chairs to be the literacy leader in their building. Lots of times the English office is called to come in and do a PD into a building, and then we're not in that building every single day. So now what we're doing is working with those literacy leaders to work side by side with them to prepare the PD, implement the PD, discuss follow-ups to that professional development so they know what they should be looking for afterwards, and then go back and touch base with them on that. So we're really looking to build the expertise in our literacy leaders. And then we're also we're collaborating with the staff of the Department of Learning Support, and we're excited about that collaboration to see how we can improve reading proficiency with our students with disabilities and our English learner students with the Office of Foreign Language as well. And so we've already had our first couple of meetings, and we've got a scheduled walkthrough where the English department and learning support, we will be walking through classrooms together to talk about what things we can collaborate together with to provide our teachers what we need. The first step to that is actually at the end of last year, we provided the University of Virginia Teachers of Struggling Readers Academy specifically to our special education teachers. And so we focused on them so that they can fill those holes in for where students are maybe missing some reading proficiency pieces. And then the other piece is that I've talked a lot about the focus on foundational early reading skills. Another layer to that with the Teachers of Struggling Readers Academy is a focus on systematic phonics instruction. And so we have to provide our teachers with pieces to the curriculum that provide them that systematic piece, because that we're starting to see that in our PALS data and our literacy data, that there are holes with phonemic awareness, phonics, and word study, and how we, and it is rocket science, and there is a lot to that, and so we're trying to make sure that our teachers are prepared for that instruction with our kindergarten and first graders.
As we look at the next steps for math, I'd like to begin, as Gwen did, with looking back at what worked well and talking about that for a moment. As we look at the research, again, that Mr. Brady referenced, when we're thinking about the coherent curriculum that's rigorous for all, I immediately think of our new 2016 standards, because when they revised these standards, one of the things that they really mentioned that they were trying to do was make it more coherent, make the vocabulary and the concepts have a better vertical articulation. And as they were doing that, they were also creating resources. So we made it like at the top of our priority last year to make sure that whatever they released, that we were on top of and sharing with schools, we were modeling with schools, we were mimicking, we were utilizing their suggestions in our resources. In TestNav, for example, one of the platforms that we utilize, when they released examples of new TEIs, we were right there looking at those and creating our own versions for our own assessments and sharing them with buildings. So it was very transparent. If we had our hands on it, teachers had their hands on it, because we didn't want it to be that they didn't know. So as we were exposing them to this, we were providing that challenging curriculum for all. And many of the new actual resources, they have collaborative also resources that they're creating, so that they're already showing you how you could differentiate and how you could allow students that need that enrichment opportunity, as well as the students who are struggling to have those opportunities for an intervention. So we're modeling a lot of our work after what VDOE is already preparing for us. In terms of the research-based strategy of closing the proficiency gap, especially for mathematics and thinking about numeracy, again, paving the way for our VDOE standards. A lot of the early K2 standards now speak highly about numeracy in ways that K1 and 2 teachers have not really taught before. So we had to do a lot of professional development, because some of those concepts are things that only math specialists had really talked about before and previously. But they realized that if you're going to build this numeracy, there are more things to talk about than just one-to-one correspondence. And what does that really mean, and what does that really look like? So our framework has changed. Again, we put that in the hands of teachers, and then we began to utilize a solid structured math block, really focused on what we call math workshop. And it calls for sound structured lessons that include number sense routines and small group instruction. I really appreciate the fact that with the math workshop, we're able to infuse parts of literacy. We're able to infuse the reading, the writing, the critical thinking. That's all a part of the structures of math workshop. The number sense routines, it opens access to all learners. The types of problems that you present, and then the format in which students are able to discuss, they're communicating, but everyone has access to be able to participate in those conversations. And in buildings that they really dug into using number sense routines and really using small group instruction that was based on data, they showed the greatest amount of growth. So we want to duplicate that. Also in those small group instructions, teachers are able to work one-on-one with students and be able to provide that immediate feedback to address misconceptions. So the students aren't suffering through 20 problems and doing it incorrectly. They're able to get that immediately needed intervention help or enrichment support that they need so that they can also show growth. And finally, one of the things that I'm really proud of are our study groups that, again, I said earlier, we used data to identify teachers to lead several of these groups in secondary. And the networks that were built weren't just centered around the direct instruction and the explicit instruction, which were important parts of those sessions, and the different types of assessments that they used and the guided practice. But it was also centered around how to make your classroom a safe environment for students to learn math, how to make your environment a place where students are in a community where they don't mind making a mistake or answering a question and possibly getting it wrong. They were there to collaborate, and with that community building piece, those networks still exist. They still email each other, and they're still being utilized this year to carry on those same types of sessions. We opened it up and we wanted to focus on teachers, new teachers, teachers that were long-term subs, and teachers that were teachers of students with disabilities. So we invited all, but we really wanted to target on those specific groups because we knew that they needed more support in the classroom to support their students. Well, what's new and what's different for this year? Again, as Gwen said, we are really excited about our non-negotiables and beginning to share those and beginning to provide additional PD and monitoring those things. One of our non-negotiables, our first one in mathematics, really centers around something that's been in place since the 2009 standards, and that's the process goals. The 5 Virginia process goals have been in place, and with the 2016 standards, they're still there. So we have as a non-negotiable that we should see evidence of these 5 things in the classrooms. We should see students problem solving. We should see them communicating. They should be connecting their ideas to other ideas and other content areas. They should be representing their ideas, and they should be reasoning. And that reasoning skill, it's definitely one that's not the easiest to teach. We tend to skip over it, but when you're really putting an important task in front of a child, they will use their reasoning skills if you give them that space to have that struggle time. And that's what we want our classrooms to look like. Another thing that's a part of our non-negotiables is that small group instruction, and whether or not in elementary school we're full out calling it math workshop with small group instruction. But in secondary we realize it looks a bit different, but we still should have time for intervention and enrichment during the small group instruction time. And finally, we are really looking at how instruction affects all tiers, but if we start our tier 1 with solid CRA, as we call it, concrete representation abstract. So we're going from very concrete instruction to moving towards how it looks in the abstract, that will help all students. It's evidence-based for students with disabilities, but for any students who might struggle with mathematics. So that's another part of our non-negotiables. As Gwen also said, we are working more strategically with the offices of learning support and foreign language. We've already in the math office began doing walkthroughs with the Office of Learning Support, going in as a collab team, going into collab plannings and into instructional time to see what that looks like, and to take that data and decide how we need to create our PD plan. One thing that we have already planned is something called a lesson study, in which we'll gather general ed and special ed teachers together to collaboratively plan a lesson. And you might say, well, that sounds like something they should be doing anyway, and it is. However, as we're doing this, a part of this is that we want to focus on the respect factor, because that's 2 adults in the building that have a different expertise, and we want to make sure that they are definitely utilizing the expertise of the other individual and then moving into the classroom and doing what's best for all students, with each person being able to say, all right, I have this special need that I have to make sure that I'm addressing, and I'm making sure that also our Tier 1 reflects that we are covering all parts of that standard. So we want to make sure that that's in place. Working with building administrators will continue, but digging differently into looking at the gap data and identifying that during our data meetings, and being sure to address that Tier 1, as we circle back to looking at that data, that the interventions can be applied to all students who struggle in mathematics. So digging into the data and looking at the gap groups. And finally, as we're looking at the math specialists, we have 9 math specialists with less than 3 years or less of experience as a math specialist. So we also have had to create a mentor program in which we can support them in doing their job, as Gwen did last year. Overall, having to just really make sure that we all have this growth mindset, that our students are able to do this. We know that they can, no matter, as Mr. Brady said, the gap group, and creating this culture that all are able to achieve, and that we as a math office and a curriculum and instruction department are making that happen. One of the things that we're also beginning to do is to reach out to the community, and we're beginning family math nights and things like that, so that we can make sure that not only our teachers and our students are involved, but we also are trying to engage our parents in this as well.
Thank you. Before you come up, we need to make some adjustments, if you don't mind. I've been asked to modify the presentation just a little bit to allow the board enough time to ask questions. So we'll we'll deviate from the remaining parts of the presentation so as to allow you time to ask questions and us to be able to address those questions.
Okay.
Okay. Would that be all right?
Yes, I mean, I think that, is there anything that you would like to highlight on the federal accountability page? And then within the STAR and math reading data, before we get into questions? What do you want to hit?
So we did have an addition of a school, and I'll let Dr. Cataldo address that, and then if you'll just remain there, because I'm sure some of the questions most likely will be related to your areas.
Thank you. Yes, if you look at,
Federal accountability.
Let's go right to
so you'll see here the federal accountability, Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, and that's up there on the board. You'll see that in 2017-18, the determination was priority and focus schools, and then that has shifted to comprehensive support and additional targeted support schools. You'll see also on there that Norview Elementary School went from focus school, and in the 2018-19 and 19-20 year, it has come off of that level of distinction. And also as well, Southside STEM Academy at Compostela has done the same thing, as well as St. Helena. And these were schools also that, Southside STEM and St. Helena, that received the Continuous Improvement Award from the Virginia Department of Education. We had 10 schools that received that award. So you'll see that that's one area of federal accountability. And I believe we had one school that that actually became a comprehensive support school, and that was Rupter Middle School.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, for these schools in particular, we have added support because these are our continuing comprehensive support and improvement schools. So there's different things that we are doing for these particular schools, providing them with additional supports. We do weekly support. So in many of our schools, because we have one senior coordinator and 2 teacher specialists, 3 people, and close to 50 schools, we generally go once every month or every 3 weeks to our other schools and provide them support. As Gwen and Rhonda mentioned, the support that we provide them is support with their reading and math specialists and administrators, so then that support can be continued after they leave. But what we do for our continuing comprehensive support and improvement schools is we do a weekly support of content for teachers. We look at the aligning the curriculum, the written, taught, and tested practices. We participate actually in their planning. So much of what a teacher does in the classroom is dependent on the planning that they do before they go into that classroom. So we not only say, observe a classroom session, but we do also observe the planning piece. We model, co-teach, observe, provide feedback. Feedback is very important. We provide feedback to our students all the time, yet teachers don't get that level of feedback. And then we also support data analysis and RTI. Monthly department chairs, collaborate with educational vendors and job-embedded coaching and professional development.
Dr.
Again, just-
Gable and Dr. Birdsong, since the STAR is just a quick report out at the moment, perhaps we could go ahead and now focus on some Q&A for reading and math, and then cut that at 1:45 to give them another 15 minutes to hit us with the STAR.
I'm comfortable with that. Did anybody want to have presentation of the STAR data before we get into the questions?
As long as we cut it in time for them to give it to us at the end.
Okay. Okay, so then what I'd like to do is open the floor to our questions then, and get into that. And we're going to go ahead and allocate at least 15 minutes for our question time right now. Okay, we'll do Ms. Campson, Ms. Smith, Ms. Basine. That'll be the order. Okay.
All right, first of all, thank you. We got a lot more detail than we've gotten in the past. I think we're probably all appreciative of that. I would suggest you might practice ahead for the time constraints in the future.
And we did. We did practice ahead.
Oh, okay.
We really did.
I have two
couple of
areas
times.
of concern, achievement gaps and the non-negotiables. I'll do a real quick thing because I know other people are waiting to ask questions. When I saw the slide on the non-negotiables, I was disappointed. It was very vague and broad. I saw when the two coordinators presented next steps, they did get into giving some detail on what they would be for the classroom, but I didn't see it here. If I read, teachers will provide learning experiences where students read, write, communicate, think quickly in every classroom, every school, every day, no exceptions. What does that look like in the classroom? I'm a classroom teacher. Just tell me what you want me to do. You know, I'm here, I'm working hard, I want my kids to do better. Tell me exactly what you want me to do. When I heard small group instruction, okay, that's pretty, for math, that's not always happening, and that's in math, we will have small group instruction for a half an hour, at least three days a week. You know, tell me something like that that's specific. If it's reading, and we're saying, I don't even know in there. Well, when you say data-driven differentiated instruction, then give the teachers the direction that goes with that, which is our guided reading groups. And that we can see. If I'm a principal and I'm walking with one of you through my building to do some narrow lens observations, and I want to know if they're doing what they're doing, if they're following the criteria, because you spend a lot of time and a lot of money training them to do the guided reading. I've been very impressed to see how much time and effort has gone into that. Then what does it look like exactly? What should I be looking for? Well, I've already been told it's a non-negotiable that I have to meet with 3 guided reading groups every single day, no matter what. That's what a non-negotiable is. It isn't something broad like this. I mean, this is fine at your level, but at the classroom level and at the school level, what do you mean when you tell me it's a math non-negotiable? What do you mean when you tell me it's a reading non-negotiable? Tell me it's a guided reading group. Tell me they have to do 5-step problem solving or daily calendar. What do they have to do? So it's very explicit, very explicit. And that's what I'd like to see when I heard some, but I want to see them posted in the walls in the schools. I want to see them in the front of the classroom.
When they met with principals, was it this week or last week? Last week, those specific things were talked about and discussed.
Well, and
we didn't
maybe
know that you needed that level at the board level, but the principals know what to look for.
Well,
Different each
do the
level.
teachers
You don't need
know
that at
what
the
you're-
board level.
But do the teachers know what we're looking for?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I mean, they can't give it to you. I mean, most teachers are probably doing guided reading groups already, as much as you've been
K-5.
focusing on it.
And K-5.
Well, that's, yeah. and K-5.
Well, one of our non-negotiables is also in middle school, that one reading group is pulled in the English classroom, but
Put it on the list.
we,
The principals know, Ms.
Yeah, but
Gibson. The principals know. They know, we've talked about it.
And
The
I'm not
specialists know.
disagreeing, I'm sure they do, but why don't we have it out in front for everybody to know? For
Okay, and-
parents
and
to know, for everybody to know.
There's a lot of information too, and with the presentation, we wanted to keep it at that 1 hour and 15.
But one of the things I
but-
specifically asked for were non-negotiables.
Yeah.
I wanted to know what they were.
Specific
Because
parts.
I want to know that there's a focus on certain activities that you have decided, with all the research that you've done,
We have.
are very specific, because you know you get a big bang for the buck on them.
So I think that what we are trying to work towards, as you had elaborated earlier, Dr. Birdsong, is that we are getting a lot of data, which is good, right? We're getting the data. We want to understand how it's being used to make intentional changes, and how it translates to achieving the targets that are set forth in the accountability plan. And every board member is a little different with how they want the data. And there's 7 of us here. We need to be able to focus exactly what it is that we want, so that we can make sure that your presentations are concise, but delivering the message that we need to hear with the questions that we are asking in our mind. So what I'm going to do is, this is a learning experience for us as well. I take what Ms. Campson's suggestions are to heart. Certainly for other members, they may not need that level of detail, but I think what we need to do is find some common ground, okay? And perhaps for some members, it might just mean a little bit extra time that they can spend with you, Dr. Birdsong, or with others, so they can get that more in-depth level. because certainly at the end of the day, we're looking at the accountability plan. Are we achieving those targets? So, won't say anything more. I'm gonna
Could
take a
I,
break.
wait, you took all the rest of my time. I rushed through that so I could say one other thing and
Okay.
you started talking.
Okay, go
No
ahead.
offense,
Ms.
but-
Okay.
All right, my other big concern
Quickly.
is achievement gaps, and what's happening with the achievement gaps. What does the organization look like? What are you doing? Now, you've used your data, you've identified this group of kids that are way behind, they scored very low. What exactly are you doing? I still haven't heard that. Are you identifying them? I'm sure we're not giving you sufficient instructional support in the schoolhouse. I think that's what we're still fighting for, is to get more people in the schoolhouse, full-time reading and math specialists in every school, money for part-time interventionists that are very specific. But do you then go through, if I'm looking at math, and I have a list, well, and we're not giving you we're not giving monthly assessments to our schools yet, but for those schools that do, or those schools that are aiming to it, do they then identify the kids by the exact skill they're having trouble with in math during this month or this quarter, and pull those group of kids, whether they're special needs kids or gifted kids or regular kids, if they're having trouble with a skill? Is that how it's organized? In other words, what's the organization beyond what we do at Tier 1 level? What happens beyond Tier 1 for our students who are low achieving and consistently low achieving? You know, and what are we going to do? What are you going to do to make data more real time? By the time we do quarterlies, it's already historic.
Let me let you answer.
So
the
what are we
question.
doing so we can be looking at it and making adjustments? I want very specifics, achievement gaps, achievement gaps, achievement gaps. I know we looked at making targets. Well, the target was 30%. That's a huge gap, a huge gap.
So, Ms.
You're going to
Campson-
see the new, and I know, the new accountability plan that just kicked in will be reducing those by 5 percentage points a year, because in a number of years, the state's going to say, if you haven't met your achievement gaps, we don't care if you're at 90%.
Okay, so
You're
hold on a
losing
second.
accreditation.
I would like for them to answer the question. Beyond a Tier 1 student, what are the mechanisms that are in place to deliver instruction beyond that
For the achievement gap
for
kids.
the achievement gap kids?
As a district, we have data protocols that we utilize, whether we want to call it Atlas. As a curriculum and instruction department, we presented this with principals last year, and we began to implement this, and for years we have. So after we have any assessment, we do look at by student, by strand, we talk about interventions, and that's in place already.
What do those interventions look like? What's the structure look like?
Well, for mathematics, you can't just have, there's no one program that's an intervention. So we have to look at, and I'm looking at research here, we have to look at the misconception and then think about the Tier 1 instruction that took place, and then think about the misconceptions, look at the student work, think about the protocol of looking at student work, and then from there, talk about, well, what did this student miss? What can we do to put in place for this child? Now, that might be delivered by the Tier 1 teacher, might be delivered by the SPED teacher, might be delivered by the RTI teacher. So there are different people that can deliver these services, but it's not just a boxed protocol, that it's a product that we hand and we say, okay, this is going to fix it.
So for this school year, and that's what you've been doing, and we know that we only have 28, 29 schools accredited. So, and the big thing I'm looking for then, and so as the board, is what are you doing more to address? I mean, achievement gaps in the 20s and 30, that's not acceptable.
That's Tier 1 instruction that's
It's
not
tier-
occurring.
right.
I'm not disagreeing.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Okay.
I'm not disagreeing that Tier 1 instruction is key, and that's why I'm sure the reading department has spent so much time and money with the PD for teachers to do guided reading, because that's where they hit it. And so, yes, but right now, we have a huge deficit, so what are we doing extra beyond that? Because obviously, Tier 1 isn't always where it needs to be, and that's something that's a constant ongoing challenge for principals and for your department. But in the meantime, the clock's ticking on the lives of the children. So what are we doing tomorrow, right? Tomorrow, or is something going on in every school to address children who have been identified as non-proficient in their grade level? And is it different from what we've been doing, which hasn't been as successful as we might like? I'm sorry, Gwen, go ahead.
Well, for reading, I would say yes. because we are, intervention in reading is reading. You have to be engaged and practicing in text. So I can say that we are beginning that monitoring process of making sure that that time is one part of it, either the master schedule or it's part of each grade level schedule of when are you doing that independent reading. At that point in time, teachers can have one-on-one conferences with their students about what is difficult for them to read, what they're understanding, what the teacher needs to come back and say, okay, I've realized through my conferences at the end of the week on Friday that these 8 students are having difficulty with cause and effect. I'm going to pull them over and work with them in a small group with grade level text. So for me in reading, our kids, and I've been in this position for 3 years, and I've done a lot of walkthroughs in schools. And you walk into a reading class, and it's an unfortunate thing to not see students with authentic text in their hands and engaged in that text. Reading is an active thing that you do, that you have to work through text to understand what you read. We all are proficient readers. When we read text, we're questioning, we're visualizing, we're making predictions, we're drawing conclusions. We do all those things while we're reading. Our students need the tools to do that, and so they also need the practice to do that as well in a wide variety of text, which directly relates to building classroom libraries, making sure that it's across genre, making sure that we have authentic text for our students. So as far as reading, me being able to say that I think that is something different that we're doing, I met yesterday with our reading specialists and department chairs and discussed this as a non-negotiable, that this is a time that has to take place. This is the 180-day push. We don't wait until to start having our students read. They need stamina. When we are, the reading test is very different from a math test or a science or a history test. A student is presented with 6 to 7 passages on 6 to 7 different subjects, and they have to be able to read each one of those, understand it, and then answer questions. And if we're not providing them a wide variety of reading material, then we're doing them a disservice.
So your
Ms.
new
Campson?
strategy is?
Ms. Campson, hold on a second, hold on. We do need to get to other questions,
Let me just reply to this one, okay? So
Very
your
quickly.
new strategy is independent reading and building classroom libraries.
That's one of our non-negotiables, making sure that independent reading happens on a daily
And
basis.
what's the time period that you require that?
Read 14.2 is like the catchy little thing.
So
with
they do 15 minutes of independent reading, and it
Right.
comes
Okay.
out of what
Dr.
portion of
Gabriel,
the
we have to
2-hour
have a
Ms.
process?
Ms.
Madam
Campson,
Chair.
hold
All right.
on, calm
Yeah.
down. Okay. Ms. Smith?
I have a concern with our targets. So we have district-wide targets of 70, 75%, and then we have school board targets that do not agree with the district targets. At a minimum, all targets should be the same across the board. Also, we have subgroups that are, the expectation for them is below the district target as well as the school board target. So what that says to me is we're willing to sacrifice these subgroups at the expense of the other groups, because if these groups, the higher groups are at the percentage point that they're at, they're going to make up the difference for the smaller group, and we will be close to target or on target. So at a minimum, all subgroups should at least be at the target.
Yeah, Dr. Birdsong, do you want to clarify that? Because I think I understand what Ms. Smith is saying, because I was a little taken aback also when I saw that. Are you referencing the 30%?
No, ma'am, that's not what I'm referencing.
So,
I think what she's referencing are the targets noted in the school board's accountability plan. And although we met the targets in the school board accountability plan, we didn't meet the targets for SOA or for ESSA. I think that's basically what she's saying.
Pages
Shouldn't
6,
have
7.
different targets.
If you
shouldn't
look
have
at the new
different targets.
accountability
I think that's
plan,
what
does
she's
set the
saying.
targets the same.
Yeah,
And we could have declined from this year. For example, if we were at 53% in writing last year, and now we're at 49, we could have met the target, but it's still below the level that we should be performing. I think that's what Ms. Smith is getting at.
in the accountability plan, there is a gradual progression to where we close those gaps. And I agree with you that those targets need to be the same for all of our students. It doesn't depend on their subgroup data, but if you look at the accountability plan year 2, 3, 4, Ms. Campson knows this better than anybody. Yeah, the gap gets closed quickly, but we have to.
The gap closes, Dr. Gabriel, but what you're saying is my expectation is not high of you, so therefore I have you at a 67%, a 63%. Let's put everybody at the target that we expect, hold the students accountable, and hold the teachers accountable for bringing them to that level. Don't put any particular subgroup at a target that is below what we would expect for anybody else.
I understand what you're saying, but we have to
can't
also
possibly.
approach this in a way that we feel that we can achieve it. So, for
You can
example,
get there gradually,
and that's
but
what we're
but
doing.
give them the target.
We do. It's in the accountability plan, but
I remember this keeps coming up, and I remember over a year ago having this conversation because I was asking the same thing, and the explanation I was given is that you can't expect a child to go or a group of children to go from 30% to 80%. That we are
in 1 year.
right,
In 1
and
year.
so you can only expect a certain percentage, and based on the recommendation of what that percentage realistically could be, we've set these gradual benchmarks to raise all of the student achievement.
Well, we're the new accountability plan starting this year, that 30 came from previous, is to decrease the gap by 5 percentage points. Each subgroup does that with a goal in 2024, the end of the accountability plan, that all groups are at the exact same place. Because Mrs. Smith is exactly right, and this is a discussion we had last spring when not everyone was on board with it, is that children perform up or down to our expectations.
Dr. Gabriel, I don't think there is an understanding of what I'm saying. Let's just use the reading priority and target as an example. The district target is 75%. The school board's target is 72%. Our black students, our target for them is 65%.
Which page are you looking at?
They're not numbered.
6, 7, and 8
18.
down at the bottom.
Can you
And
just show me
The title on it.
what's the title on that one?
reading priority 3.
Reading priority group.
Priority 3.
She'll get there. And then we have our English learners at 65%.
For this year. Remember last year when we were talking, Mrs. Smith, and I said that we needed to close all those gaps? This is what I was talking about, what you're talking about now.
Let me see.
Yeah,
Found it.
I don't think we know.
Yeah.
I don't.
So if I'm on the same page that you're on, we have, if you look at, let's just say, for example, the African-American students. The board target was set at 65%. The actual was 57%. Do we meet the goal? The target was 65%. What we want is for every student to not just be proficient at 75, but to go beyond proficiency. However, with what we have in our toolbox for this year, funding, policy, all of that, what can we realistically obtain? The accountability plan is not something that happens overnight. The accountability plan gives us 4 years to get to where we want to be. And it's just like setting a goal, running a marathon. We're not going to go out and run a marathon tomorrow. We have to pace ourselves. And so you're right, Ms. Smith. Every target should be beyond proficient. However, for these next few years, we're gradually getting ourselves there until we reach that proficiency and beyond target. That's why we set as a priority that we would be schools, we would exceed the expectations. We would have, what is it called, beyond proficiency, high achieving, which is what the state says is what, 80% or above.
Well, the state
So-
doesn't say it, but that's what we say.
That's okay. So
That's our expectation.
I don't have any more comments.
Ms. Basine?
Okay, we are well over the allotted time, so I'm just gonna,
I think we have till 6 o'clock.
well, she said 15 minutes, and one
Well,
board member had 12. So, I'm just gonna rein it back into the board level here. What do you, Dr. Birdsong, from a policy, from a budget, from a resource allocation standpoint, are you recommending to the board? What do you want us to glean from the information that you have? I mean, and when I ask that, I'm asking about teacher quality. You talked a lot about professional development, and first of all, I thank you for your presentation and for all the wealth of information that was in your presentation. But I would like to see, and as I shared in a request to you both, I would like to see, we talk a lot about effective instruction, teacher quality. Those were the key things that stand out regardless of content area. And so we have quality teachers in our classrooms, and we can't deny that those are school-based factors that impact in performance. But we cannot deny the external factors that also impact performance. And we're done talking about it. So now from a policy standpoint, we have an equity policy. What are we doing? We need to start looking at our equity report, having an equity report, school-by-school equity report, which has been requested by board members. We need to look at that. We need to hone in on the resources that are being provided in those schools. The 14, I believe 14 schools that are accredited with conditions have been in that, as Ms. Smith put it at the last meeting, have been in that status for many years in some cases. And we've got to get moving and really think about, from a policy, from an ed planning standpoint, we have our consultants here, and really look at this holistic view of what we're doing and really move on it. But I personally, want to know, even if positions are being filled, what are the years of experience of our teachers in the schools that are challenged, and really work on policies and our budget discussion on what we're going to do and prioritize to get there. So I'll just leave it there.
So Dr. Birdsong, would you like to?
I would like to address that. And it goes back to what Mr. Brady talked about with effective classroom instruction. At the end of the day, it's the classroom is where the rubber meets the road. And if it doesn't happen in the classroom, it's not going to happen. So we need to, as a leadership team, focus more of our efforts at the building level. For example, our teachers, the majority of our teacher corps probably has less than 5 years experience. So we experience a great turnover of our new teachers, and I do think we do a great job of providing them with training and professional development. And then, unfortunately, they leave for other opportunities for whatever reason. I do think there needs to be a stronger focus on professional development. I do think we need to, not that we don't do a good job, I think we could do a better job with providing training for our new teachers. Again, we have our new teacher corps, or our teacher corps is very young. And so I think whatever we can do to provide them with daily opportunities to grow, that will impact our children directly. And that would be, I think, the major area of focus. I know years back we used to have a professional development department. Not to say that these ladies don't do a great job, but we had content coordinators and another group whose job it was to go into schools every day to provide that in-building support every day for classroom teachers. That was their job. And I think because our teacher corps is so young, and sometimes you can't equate effectiveness with years of experience, because,
right.
you know, sometimes you can have a
Yes.
brand-new teacher who can just, you know,
It's
just
dynamic.
exactly, just knock it out of the park. But that is something that we've been talking about, is really looking at what we're doing with our teachers, especially with our new, our teacher induction program. What can we really do to solidify that? And again, that's not to say that what we have in place isn't good, but it could be better across the board.
Okay.
So that's one area that
More personnel.
we could definitely improve upon.
Yeah, and one last comment that I'll make is that typically when we have this presentation, we also tie in our school climate data. And I think that's extremely important because we know that that is plays a huge role in our school buildings and impacts performance directly. So I would like to see that and expect to see that soon.
Mr. Jordan?
Thank you. I appreciate the report presentation, and I really don't have much for you all beyond that. Really have thoughts for us as a team. I think the presentation data, I agree with Ms. Campson, we got more data, but I'm not sure we received the type of board level data that we need. I think we are going more and more below the line, and I think it's our responsibility to ask the questions that we have. But some of the questions I think we're asking is what I expect us to ask the superintendent to take care of, and we should be find our sweet spot. So I think as part of our accountability plan goal around being a board of distinction, I think we have to find ways to spend more time in that with Dr. Birdsong and team appropriately so we can have the quality discussions that I think we should have. I'm disappointed that my repeated requests for school-by-school presentation and hearing from some principals was either ignored or denied. But I'll give you an example why I think it would be helpful for the discussion. So in the ESSA elementary pass rate spreadsheet that was uploaded, I'm just going to pick on Dr. Walton because she's sitting in front of me. So I can look on the sheet and I can see Bayview Elementary, where she was prior. And I can see in grade 3 reading, students with disabilities. So over a 3-year period, they went from 1847 to 80. I like the board to have hear, what did you do? And and is there anything that we did to support it? Or is there anything we can do to support that? If you then go and look at grade 5 reading, you can, a little bit, it'd be nice if we had some charts, but you can kind of follow the cohort where you could see that the students where they had success in grade 3 to a certain extent was sustained at grade 5. If we saw some dips, then what was that about? So I just use that example, but you can look at Bayview Elementary reading and math scores. You can look at it broken down by groups. You can look at gaps, and we can have some conversations around, in her particular example, or in that school team's particular example, what did they do that we can learn from?
And Mr. Jordan, that was brought up as a suggestion to have our principals here, and I can't even say we. I thought it would be best that we did the presentation first and then invite principals to the next presentation around the data.
I appreciate that. I
Yeah.
didn't get any feedback. Southside STEM Academy.
Mr. Jordan.
Well, I appreciate it, Dr. Birdsong.
You're welcome.
Southside STEM Academy. So we talked about their growth. So in math overall, you saw this 41-point growth. What's that about? So I think the district roll-up is fine. I think it's, going back to what Ms. Smith said, clearly we have some gaps in issues district-wide that we need to deal with.
Absolutely.
But you look down in certain schools and you may find that much of the gaps that we're seeing may be concentrated in some schools. we also have talked about, as part of this presentation, looking at pass, advance, and pass rates. So even when you talk about the 90, 90, 90 schools, which, by the way, our accountability plan, our goals, and our equity policy is around not having 90, 90 schools. So just want to put that out there in terms of 90% minority, 90% free and reduced lunches, all kinds of research out there that speaks to that. I appreciate Doug Reeves. I went to his presentation. We've emailed Ms. Campson and I have talked about that. But across the country, the whole country still struggles with sustained replication of the 90-90-90 model. We have, in our own division, sustained success in our socially, economically diverse schools, and we have some sustained success in our schools that are in challenging environments. So I think being able to look at where there's success, where there's challenge, and what we're going to do differently is important. So there's much more that I think we could have some conversation around when you look at school by school. I just picked out a couple of schools. There's many schools in here: Norview Elementary, Coleman Place. I mean, we can go down the line, Larchmont, Taylor. In some areas, we see where there's sustained success. In other areas, we see that there are dips. And if we're able to have some conversations around even those that we deem high performing, looking at why is it that some groups may be at 45% pass advance and others are not. So I think disaggregating that data and this governance team having some of our own PD around how do we have these data discussions at the board level that then helps us to inform our work going forward is important. So I'll just leave that there. You got lots of emails with other stuff, and y'all can respond to that at some point in time.
Right, and I would also add that it's very helpful for the board when we think about these presentations to really think about what are we asking the board to think about and to consider as they are thinking of the policies, the budget. Because if we have perfect policies in place, then it's, then our question is, so what else do we need to be doing? And if it is a budget question, then we need to know well in advance so that we can talk with Dr. Birdsong when the board comes together and puts our priorities together. We can hear about the fact that, I'm just saying, for example, not every school gets to have core planning time because they have a limited staff and for whatever reason, okay? And you can say it would be helpful to have, such and such an additional person there. And so those are the types of things that we really need to hear at a board level so that we can make the biggest impact where we should be making it, and that is at the policy and at the budget level. So did Ms. Martin, Mr. Clanton, did you have any questions with regard to the data portion? No? Okay. Well, I really do thank you all very much. I know that there is a tremendous amount of effort that is going in. There are things happening at all different levels, and so we appreciate it. And I appreciate the feedback from my board on what you were looking for, outcomes and whatnot, and we are going to try our very best to make sure that we are presenting items that are succinct and to your expectations. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The next item that we have on the agenda is the educational planning update, item 3.01, with our ongoing discussion of our school start time update. Dr. Birdsong.
Good afternoon again. Today we have David Sturtz with us from Cooperative Strategy. Mr. Sturtz was here during our last school board work session. He will be providing an update to us around the lighting issue and giving us some specific information about what we need to consider in terms of, ranges of prices for lighting and just various options and our next steps. Mr. Sturtz.
Thank you, Dr. Birdsong, members of the board. It's good to be with you again. I have a brief presentation to you. The first couple slides will look familiar. It's a refresh on where we are, what the options were. What is the current recommendation, which is an update from our previous presentation. What are some different phasings of the projects that we could consider if need be, and looking at all-in costs. The difference you'll see here is that the last time we had the construction costs, we didn't have some of the site and soil study costs, which are a small add. It's not a huge cost add. We're talking small, but these are all-in cost estimates. So with that, I will proceed into our presentation. You saw this the last time, so I'm not going to read all the small text here, but as an orientation, we had two basic decision points. One, option A, was to make high school the third stagger, elementary, middle, and high in that order. There's two pathways we could get there. One, we can go there with the full $3 million estimated cost for all of the lights needed to make sure that you could sustain all of your athletic offerings at its current state with that time change. The A2 option was seeding the fact that perhaps you couldn't get all the $3 million. If you can't get all the $3 million at one time, then we could work at prioritizing those lighting projects in phases. The first phase is being about $1 million. And then that would happen at 3 of your schools, Booker T and Granby. 3 fields at those schools. So option B was suggesting that if you did not want to put those investments in lights, you can make high school the second stagger and middle school the third. There were certainly some challenges with that brought up that we discussed in our last meeting. The consensus, what I heard in our last meeting from you all, was interested in pursuing that time change with the high school as the third stagger and interested in looking at the different phasing options. Seem to have a lag here. There we go. All right. So after further discussion with district leadership, the recommendation is to proceed with the change of the high school as the third stagger and to go for the full funding if possible. There is a alternative here, which I'll discuss in the next one, which is that A2 model. So the recommendation is to start the time change in the 2021 school year. Elementary first, middle second, high school third. Work with the city expeditiously to identify, secure the $3 million in funding and for lights that has mutual benefit to the city and the district, of course, the community at large. The costs now here are those all-in costs that include all the soil studies with the ranges that you see. So the total for all 3 packages goes from a low of just over $3 million to a high. If everything is on the high end, it would be 3.7. So your likely cost is somewhere there in the middle. You see that those are broken down into 3 different phases. Those would be the priority order as identified by your athletic department, what projects need to happen first in order to meet the highest and best needs in terms of your lighting to sustain your current level of programming. If that $3 million or somewhere between 3 and 3.7 is not able to be secured immediately, then the recommendation would be to follow this phasing and perhaps to get a new clicker. There we go. Alternative option, A2, which is if the $3 million is not available to fund all the lighting project in the next year, to still implement the time change and to phase the field lighting over 2 budget cycles beginning in the present school year, if possible, reprioritizing some CIP dollars to start on one of those 3 projects. Not all 3, but one of those 3. And then in the upcoming budget year, the next budget year starting in July of 2020, to fund the rest of those phase 1 projects. So the recommendation from the district is to proceed to work with the city to obtain the $3 million to do all at once. That has you several advantages. 1, it's an equity issue. All schools get the lights in one fell swoop. 2, it's a cost. You have the cost savings of bundling this into one phase rather than extending it over several, from inflation costs, construction costs, procurement costs. And then, of course, the challenge is, of course, obtaining the money. So the timeline here as to what would be required. And so looking at your decision points. First, the administration needs direction from the board as to whether to proceed to move ahead with this stagger change in the 2020-21 school year. Based upon that, the district will specify the exact start times for elementary, middle, and high, currently ranging in the start time between 7:30 and 7:45 for the first stagger, and then each stagger proceeds at minimum 45 minutes from that starting point for middle and then high. Third, by winter of this year or spring, at the winter to spring of 2020 at the latest, ideally the end of this year, but winter to spring of 2020 at the latest, to have a decision as to whether to go for and obtain all that full $3 million in funding or to go for a phased approach. The reason for this decision, ideally by the end of the year, but no later than spring of 2020, is that procurement needs to be designed to move forward in the summer at the latest to procure firms to start on that project, be it at the lower phase 1 project budget, which is between 1 and 1.5 million, or the full, which is between 3 and 3.7, because that's going to affect your procurement. So then procure the firm no later than spring to summer of 2020, and then begin no later than November of 2020 in order to have the projects completed ideally by February of 2021 for your spring sports. So the timeline, again, refresh, we're talking about making a decision here expeditiously from the board about moving forward with the stagger or no. Then we'll return quickly with the exact start time, and then a decision by ideally the end of this year, but no later than, say, February, about whether to go for the phase 1 or the full $3.3 million.
And respectfully, before discussion, I'd like Steve Sutmiller to please come forward so he can just kind of remind you about the lighting and what that looks like for each building and what our intentions are if we plan to move forward.
Yes, ma'am.
Brings his own chair, he's used to this.
Thank you, Mr. Sutmiller.
Okay, as far as what has been discussed is what we are continuing to discuss in terms of where we are going to put the lights, and the need for the lights hasn't changed. So we're hoping to hear a decision today to see which way we're going to move with this. So.
Okay. Yeah, I thought you would give them some more details about what we're going to do with the baseball and softball, for example, at Booker T. I know there was the $50,000 being discussed about that in addition to.
Well, we do have some good news with that. We've started, I guess we'll call it a phase project there as well. The backstop, the new backstop is going up currently, and we will be meeting with Mr. Hazlett and Danny Johnston to determine the outfield fencing project. So we feel that's going to be up for this spring, and then we'll be able to initiate the lights for the baseball and softball at Booker T as we move forward.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Birdsong, I heard from the presentation that you all need specific board direction as to whether or not to start the early start times for the 2020-2021 year. But as I understand it, we actually voted on we took a motion so that we would have this year as planning. Mm-hmm. And we are set to start.
Forgive me, I misspoke.
That is the board's direction.
Forgive me, I misspoke.
Okay.
What we're talking about is moving ahead with this project in the third stagger.
I just wanted to make sure we were all good on that. We are not turning back from this. September, it's go time.
The ship has sailed. So
yes.
It's with that, then we really need to look at that specific start time, which is in flux, but we're really starting between 7:30 and 7:45, and then moving from there. But we're really looking from the board level, then it's which route do we go? Do we go work with the city to try to procure the 3.7? Do we work with just phase 1 so that we can began the procurement study.
And I think that we really need to hear from Dr. Birdsong on her recommendations.
My recommendation is that we try to secure $3 million from the city to move forward for full
Okay.
funding.
So
And it
you're-
is an equity issue.
It's
So
an
that would be my recommendation.
So you're saying option A1?
Yes.
Option A1 is your recommendation?
That is my
Okay.
recommendation.
Okay. So then, so that you have clear direction, would you need the board to vote on this at our formal meeting upcoming in October so that you can move forward with planning?
Sure.
Is that what you would
Yes.
need? Okay. I know we haven't had discussion yet, but I'm
know-
asking.
I don't know if a vote is needed. I think the direction we received the last time was to bring a recommendation to you about which proposal, cooperative strategies presented to us, basically 5 different options, an A1 and an A2, a B1 and a B2, and the 5th option being don't move forward with what you already voted on, which was not to change the start times for next year.
Okay. So, Mr. Jordan, did you have your hand up? Somebody have your hand up.
Well, I did, but
Okay.
to the point that decision had already been made, but you clarified that the question
No,
is
apologies.
what, yeah.
Yeah, which option?
Right.
So then to the board, do you have any concerns about option A1 or option A2? We've heard the consultant's recommendation, we've heard Dr. Birdsong's recommendation. Are there any items that you have that you would like to further get clarity on? Ms. Smith?
Overall concern, I definitely support going to council for the $3.7 million. When you look at or consider the way that we operate on a zero-based budget. So that means all of our money is accounted for. There's no discretionary revenue to fund something like this. And if we should vote to fund something like this, that means it's going to be at the expense of some other capital project that is within our base of capital projects. So should this come to a vote, I would prefer that we have the budget piece of it along with it, as opposed to voting on something first, then forcing the money piece of it to trail behind it. We know enough about our system to know potentially where we would take money from or where we have the ability to, so that we can take a hard look at that before we say yes to any type of, or commit to any type of funding of this through our resources.
And this will be my first experience with the budget, and my thinking was that, and I know we will engage in zero-based budgeting, but I know at a minimum, I can't imagine that we would be requesting lower funding from the city, and it was my thinking, and maybe it's flawed, that we could ask for an additional $3 million or 3.7.
And that's what I understood you to say.
Yeah,
So if you
okay.
can get the additional
Yes.
3.7, I'm in favor, but I wouldn't vote on this without knowing how we plan to secure those funds or designate those funds in our existing budget,
Yeah.
because it just doesn't work that way. So again, if we say yes to this, that means we're gonna have to decide what's not gonna get funded in our budget to pay for this. And that I'm not in favor of.
Ms. Campson?
First, I'd like to say this is why it's so great we have an accountant on the school board, because she gives us a little reality check with her expertise. Thank you very much. I think that counting on the city council to fund this is curious. I have a suggestion, and I'm listening to what Mrs. Smith says, because she certainly has a lot more expertise with budgets than I do. When I look at it, and I see Phase 3 as the practice fields, and this is for a shorter period of time. My hope would be perhaps that we could have Ms. Ingram look and see what's there, because there's always extra money there because of unfilled positions and stuff like that starts accumulating. It's a little early for it, but, to grab enough, it would be, I think that we need to have Phase 3 up and going next year. and I mean phase 3, not phase 3, phase 1, so that we could at least start planning to move ahead. Perhaps if Mrs. Ingram could do that and make us aware of it, quickly, it may be that she'll come and say no. But at least we would know from that, and then as we can work toward perhaps getting the city council to go. But we need to, we need to go, I feel, and I would be comfortable voting for phase 1 at least, that there's going to be, that when Ms. Ingram does a sweep of that budget, she may find enough to get us through that one, I doubt that she would find enough to get us through it all, and I agree with Mrs. Smith, it would be wonderful for the city council, but we're now on a different kind of budget, where we're not just asking them for stuff, they're giving us the amount of money now. It's a steady flow, and we know what we have, and which is great. But it means that if we then go back every year and say, we're excited, we got what we were asking for with the steady flow, but it's not enough, and so we're asking for more money each time, and that kind of puts the city council on the spot. So I think, let's see what, I would suggest, all right, I'll stop talking. I'll suggest that we ask Ms. Ingram to let us know if there's a possibility that we can squeeze that phase 1.
Okay.
And then we move on with the rest later, but at least get phase 1 in. I mean, those schools really need it. Booker T and Granby, they don't have any space.
Are you referring to A2, Ms. Campson?
No, I'm looking at A1. A1, phase 1.
Okay,
I know I know that A1 is to get them all in.
Yeah.
But I'm saying phase 1, which is basically what becomes the phase 1 lighting, is, it seems to me, and of course, Mr. Sutmiller can say it, he knows about it, but I'm sure he was involved in that priority of phases, and I would say that's probably the most critical.
A1.
We got to get
Phase
something
A2.
started. We
A2.
can't.
Phase 1 is
One
A2.
is
Yes, sir.
It's A2.
Yeah.
Phase 1 is A2.
Yeah.
Ms. Camps, what you're describing is the
Yeah.
A2 option.
Is the
it's
A2
A2.
option.
Oh, okay.
Well,
A1 is.
Whichever one it's called.
So what you're saying
maybe
is-
give them cutesy
yeah.
names like red and blue. I don't know.
What you're saying is that realistically, you think that A2 is probably the realistic option.
For us to do this year.
For
And
us
we
to do
know
this year.
already the
if
baseball
we-
field that we were so anxious to have taken care of at Booker T was already planned to be taken care of, and they've already moved on it, which was good news.
Would you still support Dr. Birdsong making the ask
Oh,
to city council, so that, since it's her recommendation for the first one?
I don't know. Let's listen to what Mr.
Well,
Jordan
hold
has
on.
to say.
Miss
'Cause
Martin,
I'm a little
we'll do Miss
ambivalent
Martin.
on
You still have a
that.
question? Yeah, we'll do Miss Martin, then Mr. Jordan. Go ahead.
I mean, I wish we had the money, but I support asking the city council to participate in this expense as well, because it does impact outside the boundaries of our school. And that raises another issue, and that's light pollution. I think this is a conversation we need to have with the city and not just unilaterally about the light positioning and types of lights being used. So yes, I do think that we should have that conversation, have that ask, but also iron out some of the details and possibly have some, especially for the perimeters where these lights will be, have some input from those neighborhoods and be better at communicating to them what we're proposing and get some of their input. So that's.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, Ms. Basine?
So I'm seeking some clarity now, because I thought we were having a conversation around the capital budget. Then it sounded like we were having conversations around the operational budget. And so when we're talking about the 3 million, was the idea around the capital request,
Yes.
not
And not
operating
because there's no
funds?
way we would be
Yeah.
able to,
Okay.
in my
okay.
opinion,
Thank
we
you
could
for that
support that.
clarification.
It is capital.
So I want to make sure that,
Obviously, I'm not-
Operating
That's
budget,
clear.
that would
Okay.
be,
Yeah.
everybody's
Okay.
on the street.
I thought it was operational,
number
too.
two, Ms. Campson referenced the funding formula. So last month, the city is to provide to the school division some report on what the current status is of likely funds. So one of the things I think we need to do is to reach out, if we haven't gotten it already, Dr. Birdsong, if you can get that so that you have that sense going forward.
I did have a conversation with the city manager Friday, and he said that's forthcoming.
Okay. And then what we're really saying is, out of the capital needs that we have,
Yes, sir.
we would be prioritizing $3 million to support the school start times over perhaps some other things that we have. That's where that piece that I think Ms.
That's where
Smith
Ms.
was
Smith's
referencing.
comment comes in.
So, although we've had this money sitting in a box somewhere with the land sales that took place, SWIFT funds, whatever they call it, with the sale of the Lambert's Point golf site, golf course, that may be a place to look to support this and hopefully support some infrastructure needs that I know that preliminarily have been discussed in the facilities committee around technology and servers and things that would be impact student instruction in that pathway from Berkeley Early Childhood Center and forward. Then maybe what we can look at is, and I agree with Ms. Campson with advice from Ms. Ingram and the administration, maybe we should tap that and just tap it now and be able to go forward with implementing what's needed for early start times, and there may be some other immediate projects that we need to impact also that impact student learning and success. Hopefully we'll come back later and get a chance to talk about some of the things from the joint meeting, but right now, if the school board has access to $15 million or whatever the number is, $30 million that was allocated to us as part of the funding formula to support school construction or maintenance or infrastructure, maybe as we look at these priorities, that's something that we need to decide on our own to go ahead and let the city know we intend to utilize for whatever purpose that we intend to utilize it for.
That's a bucket that we can, that would be good for Dr. Birdsong.
If that
to
makes
have, we
sense,
can
but
use
just
it.
as a.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get it. Ms. Basine?
I defer my comment.
So, Dr. Birdsong, I think what we need to know on your end is conversations that you can have with the city manager about accessing the different buckets of money in order to go forward with recommendation A1. And if those funds are not available to us, we need to hear that. And then simultaneously, if we do have funds that Ms. Ingram can look forward in our budget, but then that gets at operations, right? That gets at that. Yeah, so.
Dr. Gabriel, I apologize for cutting across you, but even as we mentioned the upwards of $2 billion work that we did at Booker T, that didn't come from the city either. Well, not directly,
Right,
if you know
it
what I
came-
mean. So
right, indirectly.
Yeah.
Right, right. So I think we need to hear back from the administration then of what are the realistic funding options that we have if we do pursue option A1, number one. And then number two, when are we going to hear the different times that will be offered to parents for the start, for the elementary schools, for the high school? I know middle school is not going to change, but when are we going to start hearing that? Because parents need to plan.
Yeah.
And they've
Communications.
prepared that.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's been previously.
we've
offered.
So communications plan is being started right now, but
Okay.
once the full, blessing on the lights is go, that will add to the communications plan
Okay.
and will be rolled out.
So at this point in time, just so I can be up to speed here,
Yes.
are they still choosing options, or are we putting out a communications plan on what it actually is? The
So-
start times?
My understanding is the start time is being refined within minutes, but we made it as,
Basically.
10-minute,
Yes,
right.
like from 7:30 or 7:40, but basically the surveys have already been conducted and
Yeah.
completed. Based on those surveys, they analyzed the data, provided a recommendation to us, and I think they shared that
voted on
at
it.
the last
We
meeting.
voted on it.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then the support structures, the before care, the after care, and all of that is simultaneously being worked on. Okay, great. Okay, Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. On our agenda, I know that we had a 6 o'clock time in here, but traditionally we have our workshops to go through 6:30, so we are going to be going through 6:30 tonight. The legislative priorities is a very, very brief presentation, from what I understand, less than 5 minutes, so we can do that quickly and then move on to policy. Can we do that?
Okay, so the legislative priorities, you should have received them in your email. We really want to focus on pages 91. There's a larger booklet that was sent to you. Really focus on pages 91 through 101. And email both Carlos and I and let us know if you have any additions or anything you would not support in this.
And
You're
this is-
referring to the VSBA.
VSBA's?
Yes, because we're going to vote on it at the VSBA
General Assembly.
meeting in next month.
Mhm. Okay.
Any questions? I mean, that's very.
Are we going to be developing our own legislative priorities, and what's the status of that?
Yes, we will be developing our own legislative priorities, and I have been working closely with Ms. Martin and Mr. Clinton to work with Advantage Strategies on that. So they will be, obviously, we have the priorities of the VSBA, and then for us, it's going to be really tailoring it down to what are the division needs, as we did in previous years. So they're going to be working on a timeline for that as well, so that we can review them, discuss them, vote on them, and have them ready to go.
Okay.
Okay, so now on to the policy discussion.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Basine and Mrs. Martin. They are the school board's liaisons to the policy committee, and ask Dr. Cataldo to come forward as well. There are a few policies that they need to bring to your attention, and they are ready to do so.
Okay.
Well, I know, Dr. Gabriel, you had asked for an update on the recess discussion, so I'm prepared
Yes.
to let you know. We did talk about the recess and trying to reach the 2020 by 2020 goal, and Mr. Pfeiffer had expressed that he was in attendance at the meeting at Willard Elementary School several months ago, and heard the discussion around that, and so we did talk about that. One of the things that a couple of things that are still we still need to work on is really defining what recess is. The 2020 by 2020 goal, or more recess group, sorry, I'm forgetting what they're calling themselves. But anyways, they're requesting that recess has no structure whatsoever. And in my opinion, I think we need to leave it to the experts, and those are experts of our administration to let us know, if that's possible and what the best play style of recess would be. And so we discussed a couple of options, one of them being piloting it in certain schools. There are a couple schools that think that they could easily work in the 20 minutes in the day and 20 minutes in the afternoon. But not all schools are there. And so the bottom line, I guess, would say, and how it would affect the budget, is that we would need more personnel to implement this. And one of the suggestions was, again, looking at increasing recess and increasing physical education class time. And if we were to, so at our retreat, we had voted to set the minimum physical education hours for weekly at 100. We brought it down from 150 to 100. We do have some schools that are currently at having meeting that 150-hour standard of PE timeframe, but not all of them are. But if we want to do two things, increase recess time and increase PE time, that would require an additional 11 staff PE assistants that we could use to do both, because we need to have enough staff to monitor, to of course support the regular school day, but this would be also be present to monitor the recess time, free play, and also the PE time. So it has been estimated at, with the 11 additional staff, that it would be around $363,000 increase to our budget.
So then the question is, I appreciate the feedback. When will the board then receive a recommendation from the administration to consider moving in that direction after you all have, you've taken into the input, the principals, curriculum, all of that? When will there be a recommendation coming forth for the board to have discussion on it?
Well, the October 25th is the next day for the Policy Review Committee.
Okay.
So we plan to make a recommendation at that meeting.
Okay.
And then be able to discuss that with the Policy Review Committee, and then bring that forward here at the following board meeting.
So that would be for the November work session?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, I guess one of the big questions is, are we willing to, just like we were talking about with lighting, are we willing to find $363,000 in our budget this year, or do we want to phase that in as well? So that's.
I mean, these are all topics of discussion that we have to have. Ms. Smith?
I totally support the recess. However, I am not in favor of increasing personnel for recess ahead of increasing resources for math and reading specialists, especially in the 14 or so schools that we have that could desperately use that type of addition to their leadership.
So really what we're getting at here is we're getting at whether or not there's going to be a policy change. And so all of these items of discussion are going to affect whether or not we move forward to do a policy change. So, okay, hold on.
One clarification.
Yes.
The 11 additional PE assistants is actually really originally going to take the wellness policy of 100 minutes per week for students in PE to provide them 150 minutes, which used to be the previous policy. So the thought was, if we are going to fix the wellness policy by giving 150 minutes 3 times a week with 11 personnel to do that, we would have additional personnel. Those 11 same personnel could assist in the PE part. So it was not just because, the recess part, excuse me, yeah. It was not just for recess. It was originally to get us back to our wellness policy, which used to be 150 minutes. So that's what the 11 people were for.
Okay.
And then as an offset, it would allow us to do the recess as well. But originally, it was going to be for PE, 3 times a week.
Okay.
Yeah, and Dr. Cataldo clarified what I was going to clarify, that we really start convoluting the discussion when we start talking about the PE piece and the recess piece, which are separate, although, the staff could help with that. So there are 2 decisions that are potentially need to be discussed, which is the minutes in the wellness policy, and then separate from that is the recess discussion. So, but I would really like to have some, I think it's important that we continue on that timeline of discussion and decision-making. We do have several policies from VSBA, and I do want in our, I don't know how much time we have for this as well, but just, we have a lot of folks, graciously working in multiple roles right now. And so we are learning and working very hard in trying to get our policies formatted in a way, and also so that we can move forward, and it's actually clear to all of you, what we currently have in place, what the revisions are based on state code and in terms of legal references and updates. and so that we can have a clear set of policies on the consent agenda next month for adoption.
I'm sorry, I wasn't done with the recess, though. About the PE and the recess, though, in our discussion, we can't fulfill that recess piece. I want to be very clear on that without extra staff. So we can't fulfill that goal. So they are actually very intertwined, the PE assistants and the recess monitors.
Because it requires additional staff, because we have MOUs with our teachers that they must have 30 minutes for lunch, and there's other things that we need to follow with that. So in order to get this extra time for students to have recess, it would require extra personnel. And so that's why we thought about putting the two together.
So then let's do this. Let's frame this policy discussion first then around the policies that we are going to have on our consent agenda, okay? Which I know that you all are working very hard on getting those formats in alignment. So policies that are coming forth on the consent agenda then for the policy committee, what are some of the look-fors that you wanted to make the board aware of that you need our input on for the consent agenda?
We also went back and discussed the minor revisions to the dress code policy that we want to revisit. So what from feedback we've gotten from the principals, we're going to include straps on shirts.
Okay.
Very simple one. And then also the I'm sorry.
For us to vote on then.
Well, that's hopefully will be.
You could vote on, because that would not change.
Yeah.
That's not.
But we're also, the administration is drafting regulations to support our dress code policy. That's the other piece.
So then is the straps going to be in the regulations portion, or is it going to be policy?
First, the straps should be policy first.
Okay.
And the regulations should reflect what is already in the policy, kind of the spirit of what your policy is. So we'll be working on that and providing that information as well at the next policy review committee about what we believe the regulations should be, fulfilling the actual policy that you all pass.
Okay. And I want to be clear, because I've seen in Facebook posts and all around, people have not been reading our policy and are wearing midriff shirts and their bellies are showing and things like that. That is unacceptable. It states that in our policy, no midriffs showing. We did go so far as to add that we wanted opaque covering front, back, and sides. We left out the straps, and that's become an issue. So it's really just an oversight that we're correcting there.
Okay. All right.
So you are bringing, this will be on the consent, is that what you're saying, that this revised policy will be on the consent agenda? Or is it going back to the policy review committee for additional feedback?
We talked about it at the last meeting, so it'll be on the consent agenda.
It will be on the consent agenda.
Okay, so there are no additional changes that were posed by building principals that needed to be discussed? And I'm looking at Dr. Lands because I thought I heard a variety of issues. I'm not sure that it's ready.
Excuse me, just for one moment. If this policy that's being discussed is planned to come up for a vote at the next business meeting, can you just tell me where on board docs it is? So we can follow it. I'm talking about
It's not on board docs, and I don't think it's ready.
Well, that's
I don't think it's ready for a vote for this meeting, because I think there's a little more discussion that's going to be going on about some additional revisions based on principals' feedback.
So wait on principal input.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Not know that. Okay.
So the items that we need to be able to discuss, to vote on at the next business meeting, can we go through those items?
Yes. Let's
Please.
do that. Let's do that.
We have the recess, and the dress code, and then the school board pay and compensation. So that was the other one we discussed.
So was that for the bulk of policies that are there, aside from the pay and comp one, are there any other policies that we need to have additional input, or are there board members that have questions on the policies that are there? Ms. Campson.
Thank you. The recess PE one, The reason that we did have 30 minutes 3 times a week for every single classroom in this district, the reason that changed was when the massive cuts to the schoolhouse began, they cut PE assistants. You must have a teacher or an adult in the gym or outside with every class. And so long ago, they made the teachers do that. They had to stay during PE time if there were 2 classes and there are 3 classes. And when we started giving them a resource time so they could have meetings and planning together, those assistants were hired. And so we were set with that, and that's why that 150 minutes was there. It was based on the reorganization that put assistants in there so teachers could be free to do, not to go to the mall, but to do what they needed to do when we started doing team planning. And a number of those were cut. Now, and along with a number of other positions, as we know, those of us who were fighting for more reading and math specialists in the last budget. So I definitely agree with Ms. Smith. We have to make decisions, and the decision when we go to add people is, our staff, of which we need them all. They're all needed. We have to prioritize. And so the priority is, do we go with reading and math support, instructional support in our schools first, or do we make this the priority? So I just, and is that being discussed?
That's why I was asking that question.
Right, and is this being discussed in the policy meeting? And my other concern is the state requires a certain number of instructional minutes for every subject. And it's and having done master schedules for years, I can tell you that you start not with the PE or recess, you start with the instructional minutes for reading, math, science, and social studies. You put those into the thing, and then you start adding these extra things. When we were fully staffed for all the resources, then you always knew that you would every student would go to a resource every day for 45 minutes, which would music, art, and 3 PE hits, and so you knew that you were building an uninterrupted 45-minute block, but you were building it around an uninterrupted 2-hour block, and so that needs to be looked at. You can't just willy-nilly start adding time in. It's easier to do it at the lower grades, and that would be a good place to start, perhaps, because I understand parents, they want more recess time, but a lot of that reflects the school they're in. If you're in a highly accredited school, then you're not as focused on instructional minutes as if you're in a struggling school. And so, what do the parents in the struggling schools have to say about it?
So then.
All those, I'm just saying that needs to be a part of the discussion.
It does. It certainly does.
But also that resource piece. Some schools have less resource time and offer less extracurriculars than others because they can't do that. And so as much as we want to implement this uniformly, we won't be able to. And that's okay. And to some degree, at least we'd be marking the minimum of what we can do. But we also don't want to take away from music and art and other resources.
Right. Ms. Basine.
Yeah. First, I want to apologize to Ms. Martin because I did cut across with separating, the discussion around separating the two, and didn't realize in the discussion it wasn't clear that the staffing piece was also part of the recess piece tied together. Having said that, even if we were to keep the policy as it is, and still have that focus on recess, we still need to have that consideration. We still need to consider the monitors, because I was also at that recess community meeting just to observe and listen to what principals were saying. And of course, it was just to let you all know, it was a very small group of principals, largely from one side of the city. And as Ms. Campson just said, a variety of needs, and they are doing a variety of different things in their school building, whether it's, breaking for 10 minutes or doing mindfulness activities in their schools. Just different things. It's not recess, and I think we all are very passionate about recess and want to do it, would like to do it, but I think we need to have more collaborative conversation, between the board, the administration, and let them really go back and really look at some of the staffing and the budget implications. I don't think we're there yet to really move forward with a decision, and if I'm wrong about that, correct me, but it doesn't sound like we are. So for now, I would like to still have that moving along, but trying to bring it back into some of the things that we do need to, the policies that we do need to move forward on. I don't know if did you?
You
Were you
mentioned
trying
the
to
pilot
jump in?
program. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit more about that? Because won't the pilot inform the decisions about what it needs to look like? And that's the whole point of having a pilot,
Well,
correct?
potentially, but of course, we'd have to, because some schools are better equipped, or, than others, we don't have that equity that we want, we're aiming for. Choosing what those schools would be would definitely determine on whether it'd be replicable. I mean, it's.
For the sake of time, I'm going to ask the policy committee. As the policy committee, the request from the board is that is to come back to dig deep with the administration on what their recommendation is to respond to not just community, but what the board has asked to research. Can we extend our recess beyond the 20 minutes that we have in the wellness policy right now? That's really what we're asking
So
for.
this is what I'm bringing to you. I need clarification from the board. Is our goal to meet the 2020? And that's what we were working on. How do we meet the 2020? And we discussed a little bit of maybe we do 15-15, but we didn't know if that was acceptable. So we're bringing to you if we want to meet the 2020, I'm telling you, we need to have, the recommendation is that we need to hire 11 staff members that would both increase allow us to meet our goals with the wellness policy and PE, and also with the recess. Otherwise, just hiring people part-time for recess, in most schools, it's just not going to work.
Dr. Gabriel?
Okay, please. Okay,
So
Mr.
we
Jordan.
are relitigating, we're spending all our time on a recess policy that the board really hasn't provided, as Ms. Martin said, direction on. I had the opportunity to sit in on the policy committee meeting in Ms. Bassine's absence. There was a lot of great discussion there. If it's in committee, it should stay in committee until the committee is ready with the administration to come forward for recommendation. Otherwise, if we want to make the committee as a whole and we discuss it here as a board, let's just put that on the work session agenda and do that work. But I think it's really not fair to the staff and to the committee members if they spend hours in the meetings and preparing for the meetings, and then we come back here and have the discussion all over again, while there are policies that we may be out of compliance with the law that we need to work on.
Right.
So we've spent all our time thus far really talking about something that, as far as I can see, unless there's some update to the wellness policy that's embedded in here somewhere, it's not even for us to act upon.
Well,
So we need to, so I'm pleading, as I have for months now, we have policies that we have to get up to date from February and May and whatever. And as a board that governs through policy, we cannot be in a position where there are laws that have been passed and we have not updated our policies accordingly and have an understanding as a team what it is that we're supposed to be doing to be in compliance with the law. And I think that has to take priority right now over anything else.
I agree with you on
Can
that.
I ask a quick question? If it's a law, then if it's a law and we're trying to align a policy to a law, and this is just for clarification, from my own personal knowledge, I would think that that would be something that the committee would automatically do. It wouldn't even need a discussion because you don't argue against putting a law in. If it's the law, it's the law, so wouldn't you, I mean, and I could be wrong, that's why I'm asking this question, but I guess.
Yes.
Can you talk to the regulations that are being updated?
Right,
the
well, could I just
policies?
finish saying this real quick, Ms. Martin? My suggestion, if we're saying, well, the legislature passed this law and we need to align our policies to the law, I don't know what we're discussing. To me, it would be the policy committee would make the alignment because it's the law and give it to us and say, we've aligned it, let's put, so this one's done, let's put it on the consent agenda.
That's my fault, because I
could see-
assumed, because that is the process, and I didn't go over
Yeah,
that.
because one.
But that is
now, I
what's
know-
happening
Now,
with
the whole recess thing and the dress code, those are other things
But
that
she'd
we didn't
asked me to
discuss.
report on that.
Right, right. So,
Okay.
so then, Dr. Cataldo.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here. At 5.01, we have, there are 4 policies there. BHD, which is a compensation, which I think there's going to be discussion on that. The other 3 all have a Z behind them because most of these policies from February and from May were all statutory policies. So they're all policies that, as Ms. Campson said, is law, and there's nothing that we feel that we need to go above and beyond that. In the 3 that we do feel that we need to make a little more clarity, not changing the law, but just making it a little more clear, is the DJBZ, which is petty cash funds, the payroll procedure.
I hate to interrupt you, but I need to add one thing. A DHB is one that has to be addressed tonight.
Okay,
And in
yeah.
fact, I noticed earlier today, there is a version DZ that should be before the board, and I think it's been presented at some point through, after I pointed it out earlier today, I think a copy was added to the
Should be on board
agenda.
docs. It
But
on
there
board
is a
docs.
choice that the board needs to look at
Right.
with regard to BHD, that if it's not decided tonight, then it should not be on the agenda on the 16th for a vote. I just want to make that clear, that we need to discuss that if it's going to be voted on the 16th.
And to Ms. Campson's question, as school board members, we are responsible for knowing the policies, all of them. The policy review committee function is to try to help streamline that process. But when these policies, we vote on these policies, we then are responsible for adhering to those policies. So it's our responsibility to make sure that we have read them and understand them prior to the vote and then after we vote. But there's been times where, we haven't always been in sync with our policies. And so I don't want it to get, you're correct, that if the law has changed, we have to update our policies to align with the law. But sometimes we add and have the right to add additional things to the policy that fits for Norfolk Public Schools. And so part of this is for the committee to look at those things, bring those highlights to us.
Yeah.
And if we have some discussions or we want to say, well, go back, we want you to do something different, that's the benefit of having the discussion, but have the policy committee do that vetting with the work that the administration has done. And then they have the responsibility then to update any regulations for implementing that policy.
Thank you for that
Right.
clarification, Mr. Jordan.
So,
PhD.
so then the policy that Mr. Cloud is referencing that we have to discuss.
Correct, that's right. in
And I
there.
can lead that discussion.
Yeah.
I think would be.
Yeah.
That's what I was
just
talking about, the
updated.
pay and compensation is the other one that we need to vote on, and
Okay.
that's the
Right.
BHDZ.
Well, BHD, your current policy dates from 1998, which as a consequence, it's out of alignment with the VSBA policy for elected school boards, but it's also just, it has provisions in it that would only apply to an appointed school board, so it's no longer, accurate at all. It's more instead, really. The choice that you have now is whether you want to adopt the model BHD that the VSBA has put out, which essentially says that the school boards receive an annual salary as provided by law, or whether you want to go into some more detail as to what exactly that means when you're talking about a Norfolk elected school board. And I was requested to draft something that would go into some more detail, giving guidance both to the public and the school board as to what exactly the limits of the school board's authority are now with regard to its salaries, given that you're an elected school board. So BHDZ is my draft of a policy that does that. It's not required. The VSBA model is fine if you want to just leave it at that. But if you want something that goes into more details exactly what the law is, in terms of what your limits are, which my policy sets it out. You can set your salaries as high as $28,000 and the chair's salary as high as $30,000 now. Also, it sets out the process. Because you're an elected school board, the way the statutes work, it's designed to allow the public to vote on you after you give yourself a salary increase, but before you can actually get it. So for example, this year, if you want to increase your salaries, you will have to vote on it before December 31st. And then that would take effect on July 1st after the next election. All salary increases that the board will vote on in the future have to be done the year before an election, by December 31st of the year before an election. And they will all take effect on July 1st of the election year. Because of the way your elections work, they're staggered and they occur in May. All of that is put into my version of BHD, and I've added a Z to it to indicate that it would be a policy unique to Norfolk. It's not the VSBA model. It's not in conflict with the VSBA model. They just simply say, in shorthand, that your salaries are determined as provided by law. So the choice really is whether for the 16th you would prefer the VSBA, the current VSBA model, BHD, or the more elaborate BHD that I've drafted and added a Z to it. I can also tell you I'm separately looking at the question, which apparently had never come up before, whether or not school board members can participate in the health insurance. The model VSBA policy provides that as an option. I've talked to your HR, and they weren't able to tell me, directed me to the city's HR, and I have been communicating with them, and they're taking a look at the question. I believe that council members participate in the health insurance, and you all are part of the same consortium. The school board's health and the school system's health insurance is health insurance that's purchased through the city by a consortium that includes the school, the city, the NRHA, I think all the constitutional officers, they all participate and negotiate an annual agreement with, currently it's Optum. But if I determine between now and the 16th that you are eligible, I will add that provision in. Although I don't think it needs to be in your policy for you all to take advantage of it. And I'll let you know as soon as I find out something.
I see liability insurance. Is that something we already have?
Yes.
So that's already, oh, okay, thank you.
That's referencing a cross-reference to another policy.
Okay.
So yes,
Thank you.
liability insurance to protect.
So was there a recommendation from the policy committee on which version we adopt?
His revised version Z.
Which is the clean draft
Clean
that
one.
you see in
Okay.
the
That's
packet.
the one labeled,
With the Z.
you're saying, mine.
Okay.
Right,
That's your
yours.
recommendation. Okay.
So, Mr. Cloud, you put that top limit. Is there a bottom minimum?
We're there.
No.
For the-
Oh.
And
Well,
the
you can't get
statute
much
is
more
only
bottom than we
applies,
are.
the statutory procedure only applies to increasing your salaries. You could lower or eliminate your salaries at any time.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So are there any board members that have questions on the
I was just going to add one thing. Your current salaries were set by the council because you were appointed some years ago and are the maximum allowable for the appointed Norfolk School Board, which no longer exists. And they're very low. I'm not sure what they are. Maybe $2,000 for ordinary members and $3,000 for the chair, but something in that.
Okay. Ms. Smith?
I just want to say, if we were to agree to this, it's really more than what we see here, because the amounts shown here are the base salary. It doesn't include the taxes that would be attached to it that the district would have to pay. nor does it include if there's any cost share from the district for the health insurance if we choose to participate in that.
That's true, these limits are just on the salaries.
Right, it's just the base. So it's not a clear picture of what this would really look like and the impact it would have on the district.
No, but it is what the statute says.
Right, I agree.
Statute doesn't address those things. Those are within your discretion.
Otherwise, we'd be changing the
And I'm
policy
saying
constantly.
for us to be aware of and for us to know, I understand what you're saying, but there's more to it than just what we see here.
Ms. Basine?
And the council has set its salaries at those limits. Their limits are the same, and they've been at the maximum of 30 and 28,000 for some years.
Yeah, and Ms. Smith, thank you for pointing that out. So this is just, it's a policy that says what we can do based on the statute. It is not saying that that is what we will do. So to be clear, that we are not saying that right now, but when we get into the budget discussion, and if this comes up as something that the board chooses to do, all of those things would have to be considered.
Right.
So with that's the recommendation from the committee in regard to that specific policy.
What other recommendations do you all have for us for the items that are before us on the consent agenda?
I have a comment on this one if we're still discussing it.
Okay.
So, one, I said it on the committee, that's how I knew this was being discussed. I did not know that we were looking at this. So, if the deadline is December 31st, I'm not sure why we have to do this by the next business meeting unless there's something in here I'm not
No,
following.
I don't think the change to the policy is required in order for you to change your salaries, if that's what you want to do.
I guess,
Your salary, your ability to do this is set by statute. Whether or not you have it in a policy wouldn't matter. But your policy does need to be changed.
right, so if the policy needs to be changed because we're not aligned with the state code, then I think we should do that.
Yeah.
If you're saying that the policy is being changed because we wish for it to change, that to me is different, so I'm not clear on
Well,
what.
the policy is just, your current policy, it doesn't reflect the law.
Okay.
The VSBA policy is the same as my policy, it just doesn't set out the details.
Right. So I would think that if we have a policy that's not aligned with the law, that we would do the VSBA model and bring us in compliance with the law. And then the board needs to have a discussion around, a public discussion around what our salaries may be. And that's what has to be adopted by December 31st, if I'm understanding correctly.
If you're gonna change your salaries, you have to change the salaries by
December 31st, but we can.
Yeah, I have no problem with
The
the
policy.
VSBA model at all.
Right, so what I'm suggesting is get in alignment with the code. But I don't think we should be setting salaries at this point without having some discussion.
But can you explain, I'm
No,
sorry.
I'm not saying,
We're not,
the policy, the alternative policy doesn't do anything to set your salaries.
in
It
the
just
code.
sets out what the
Oh, the as high
VSBA
as,
law
okay, I
yes,
got you.
that's
is
the
saying.
cap.
Right, yeah.
In other words, you can
Okay.
you can have a policy that says you can set your salaries however the law allows you to, or you can have a policy that says this is how you can set your salaries under the law, and goes into it. But I think the VSBA policy actually would be fine. That is, I don't see any need to go into all these details in your policy.
Well, I don't either, that's what I'm asking.
You have to follow the law.
Right.
And, the public is meant to be aware of the laws, soon to be aware of it.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing, though, is that the policy committee looked at this, and the recommendation is the recommendation that was brought forth by Mr. Cloud.
Well, I'm
From
not
discussion that we
recommending
had in
either
the policy committee, and
I drafted
he agreed to draft
BHTZ
it.
because I was asked to do an alternative.
Okay.
But actually, I would say I like the VSBA approach. The reason partially being just because all these laws can change at any time. If you just say, we'll set our salaries according to law, then it's always correct. You never have to change it. And that's why the VSBA's done it that way.
Right. Okay.
So,
I like that
you know,
approach.
this draft model just really summarizes for the board what the law is, but there's no need to put a summary of the law in there. And I think it would be fine to go ahead and put the VSBA model policy on the agenda for the 16th. Now, one thing, the model policy mentions the insurance plan.
That
I haven't
was
got
our
a
big
confirmation on that. We may have to delete that between now and the 16th.
Okay.
But hopefully in a couple of days, I'll have that confirmation.
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds good.
And I think that's fine, and I'm very comfortable with that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're gonna red line the insurance item. We're going to put the,
He's
Well,
gonna
only
check
because
on,
we
he's
don't,
gonna
we don't
check
have
on
a
it.
definitive answer as to whether we are eligible to participate in the insurance policy.
Right, so Mr.
So
Cloud is
sh-
gonna check
she'll
on that.
check on that.
And if, based on what he finds out, we are either gonna remove it or just leave it. And so, but we're gonna go with the VSBA
Okay.
policy for the consent agenda.
All right. What other questions do we have about the other policies that are on the consent agenda? Or details that you need to share with us about that?
A majority of the policies are changes in the state code. I don't know if there's anything specific that Mrs. Martin and Mr. Jordan, Dr. Cataldo, that you talked about at the last policy committee meeting that you wanted to highlight controversial or new policies that you felt needed specific board attention. I think,
There were only 3 that the Z was added.
okay.
And I believe theirs are Ms. Ingram's petty cash funds, payroll procedures, and cash in school buildings.
Okay.
Did anybody have questions on those? No? Okay.
Just a general question, in time for the business meeting, can you all just, I would like to ask if the board would just have the policy committee quickly, or someone go back and look at the conflict of interest and disclosure of economic interest policy to make sure that, I know we got an update we approved an update last fall. Just want to make sure in those February and May recommendations from VSBA, there were no other changes. I'm not aware of any. I just want to make sure that we're up to date on it.
Well, if there have been any changes at the state level, it would have been on our list.
It should have been, but I mean, you all look at the list. I'm just asking you just to do
But we
a
review them as
quality
they
check.
come out, so.
If the answer is none, I'm fine with that. I'm just saying, I don't know. I just want to make sure we're in sync with that.
Yeah.
Why did you single that one out?
Because it's been a lot of changes to it, and then I just went to the, what was the conference? What was the conference we just went to?
The legislative.
The legislative.
Oh, the Legislative Advocacy
talk about
Conference,
that.
and they had the,
yes, sir.
one of the persons from the FOIA was there, and she was, they basically did a training. So,
Yeah.
we're required to do all that training, so that's why it was fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, they talked a lot about that a lot.
Are there any other further questions regarding the policies that we are going to be voting on for the October business meeting?
So the policies that are there
Yes.
just kind of got placed there in the last 24, 48 hours.
Right.
So I may have some questions
Okay.
when I get a chance to review them.
Right.
Okay.
And so rounding back to originally when I started, where everyone is kind of learning how to put this together. So be on the lookout for the policies to be very clear, what our current version is, what the new state, what the VSBA changes are, and what our new policy would look like. So, I would like everyone to read through those before the next business meeting.
Sure, thanks.
So-
And Mr. Jordan, I'm going to look into that.
Yeah.
I know that we've had some discussions about, how policies are on the board docs, public view, private view, so I'm going to look into that because certainly we want to make sure that not only the board members have the ability to read and review the information, but also the public as well.
And just,
So just, it's-
just as a reminder,
yeah.
I think part of it, as I've mentioned before, is because we've gone into board docs and made all these meetings active, it causes a challenge. So if we can, if you all would take another look at that,
Yeah.
I think it would.
Well, it's not
Help us.
just, I mean, that's part of it, but it's also that we have new staff that are participating in this policy process, and so bringing them up to speed, we're still ironing it out.
Yeah.
I agree.
And
I was
and I
just
think
speaking to
another
the-
challenge is that over the last year, I would say a lot of the policies that the board already adopted
Haven't been
are not
They're not
reflected
Not
on
on
board
there.
docs,
Yeah.
which makes it
Right.
challenging for the
Yeah.
committee to
Miss-
determine which changes are
Which
needed.
draft,
Yes.
right.
Ms. Tanner's going through and she's going back and updating the directory to make sure that those changes
Yeah.
were made public.
Yeah.
Right, right.
So I'll say, I
So-
really appreciate the effort that you all are making with the staff, trying to put the best foot forward for us so that we can make educated, informed decisions. I really appreciate it. I know it's a little painful
job,
right now,
guys.
but I do appreciate it. So I do have, from myself, a couple of policies that I would like for the Policy Review Committee to consider. Thank you for bringing forth the update on the recess and the health. That is very important. The other item is the family life education policy that we have. We have had a couple of constituents bring that up. And I know that Ms. Basine, we've shared a couple of emails, but I would like for you all, and if the board agrees, to take a look at that policy and see if there's a revision. The specific ask is to include same-sex families in the family life education. And I know that there's some details that the constituents that brought this forward had outlined. And so I would ask for you all to take a look at that, because I think it is important. Yes.
Yeah, as we've shared in discussion around that, so some of what is in there is related to the curriculum, the family life curriculum, that is not in the policy. But the first question that we always want to ask is, are we adhering to the policy that is before us? And right now, I think that's the main question. So we'll look at that, but our priority right now is to make sure that our policy process is in place,
Yeah.
that our policies that have been adopted have been uploaded to board docs so that the public and the board are not confused about what our policies are, and so that everyone can ensure that we are implementing them with fidelity. But your concerns, and I know Ms. Smith also had raised some questions, I hope that we can talk about that in greater detail in the future, but right now, I would like for that to be our focus as we get everyone up to speed on the policy process, because it is such an important part of our work. But that is extremely important. As I've shared, it's important to me as well that we look at that specific policy. But I think that's where we are right now, just to make sure that we're in alignment and adhering to our policies.
So then will we be able to hear if the curriculum is in alignment with the policy at least, then?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to, not at the next meeting,
Right,
no. I mean,
okay.
we need to meet and
Right,
discuss
right.
it. and ha-
Right, that's what I mean.
But I'm just thinking also, I mean, if we're going to touch on same-sex marriage in our sex ed, or family ed, sorry.
Family life.
Family life class. You know, there are different ways that we could even approach it, because I know one of the conversations I have a lot is about how we don't have an inclusive policy for our staff and so forth. So, I mean, we could also work in that direction and not just revise it in one policy. So it's a broader discussion we have to have as a board on how we want to handle that situation.
Okay.
Then can I ask one quick question based on hearing that? When family life education was mandated, and maybe this has changed then, all the lessons are listed, what's the focus of each lesson, and parents had the option to opt out of the entire thing or opt out by topic, because I know when I was at Tanner's Creek, I was in charge of all the opt-outs because they had a certain time in the day, once a week they did it. are parents still allowed to opt out? And so that's always made clear to parents that if it's something they're uncomfortable with, they can opt their child out, and their child will get an alternate educational experience. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that was still in place. Thank you.
So where are we then? We're waiting it's not going to the policy committee right now, is that what we're saying?
Well, I think it's on our list. I mean, it's on on the board directive, but I noticed that you had put in a deadline, which I'm asking to not do that, because we haven't, talked about it as a board, to provide that deadline, not only for us, but so to ensure that we're being collaborative with the administration in moving forward with it. We certainly will have that looked at, because family life, of course, covers more than that. It covers a variety of topics, which I have questions about some of those other topics as well. So I think, as Ms. Martin said, it's, I think it touches on a lot of different other policies that we have that need to also be examined. So I'm asking for more time so that we can talk about
But just
it.
for clarity then, I thought I heard that there was a question about whether the curriculum was aligned with the policy.
That's what I'm hearing from Dr. Birdsong and from you all.
No, I thought you raised that. I'm saying if there's a question whether or not our curriculum is aligned with our policy, then the administration can make that determination.
Yes, that's
the
one,
next
that's.
step.
I mean,
that-
I'm
It's
saying,
on the list.
no, I'm not saying the next step. I'm saying, don't we have to be aligned?
It should be.
And then apparently we last revised the policy, if this is correct, September of 2018. So is there any reason to believe that it's not aligned?
No, it's not that it's not aligned, it's that we've gotten some comments.
Two separate things.
Right.
Yeah.
I understand the.
Alignment, it's just
Well,
got another comment.
well, I understand the request to make a change to the policy, but then I also thought I heard a question raised whether or not currently our curriculum is aligned with the current policy. So
That's
if,
actually not my question. My question is specifically on what the stakeholder had a question about, and that was in being inclusive of all different families.
Which is to
and
update
family-
the policy.
Which would be to update the policy.
but there's no question right now
But
about
the
our current curriculum being aligned with our current policy.
And can I clarify too a couple of things? So I've looked into this quite a bit because of the questions that I've had myself and as well as stakeholders. But first and foremost, so our policy is pretty general, and what part of that policy says that we must have a community involvement team. And that is the question, is do we have that community involvement team? Have we ever had one? And what recommendations has that community involvement team put?
So that
So
would
if
be
we
following
don't
the
have that, the
policy.
first step is to do that. We're aligned with the curriculum. The curriculum is set by the Virginia Department of Education. And the community involvement team is in place to look at the curriculum and to provide recommendations back that these are some changes that we want to see in the curriculum, and how do we go about then that process. So it may not even be a change in the policy itself, it just may be a mechanism to change the curriculum to be more inclusive. Now, having an inclusive policy or an inclusion policy, which is something I support as well, that's, a different topic, but I think that's where we we come back in the committee and talk about how that would look,
All right.
So,
So then, last point of, that I would like for us to get I would like to get some feedback on. We had a member of the community approach the board at our last business meeting, and he requested that we extend the lease of the ability for him to use the Academy for Discovery as their church. They have asked us, it does not align with our policy. Our policy has a very specific timeline for which we allow a certain entity to lease a building. So my question to the board then is, do you all, and this is something for you all to think about, would you all consider making an exception to that policy, being that he would be providing the board with information about the purchase of a building that they are going to be securing?
Can I ask a quick question then? And I read his letter that came in too, and certainly was a reasonable request, I felt. I didn't realize that we had a policy. Is that policy directed because it's a religious organization?
No.
Because we have basketball teams that use it, we have cheerleaders that use it. I mean, and they don't have a time limit.
No.
The reason for the time limit is once the school board chooses to open up its buildings to public use and after hours, it makes the buildings what they're called designated public forums. Just like your public speaker portion of your meeting is a designated public forum. Once you do that, your ability to allow certain things and to regulate certain things is limited by the First Amendment. All provisions of the First Amendment, the free speech clause, the free exercise of religion clause, and the establishment of religion clause. Years ago, the reason that was put in was because there was case law, and I haven't looked at the subject lately, that distinguished between allowing religious groups to use facilities on an equal basis as anybody else for all sorts of purposes, and allowing a church to be established in a school building, which is, I don't know if that's what they're doing, but that's what is sometimes done. And given the case law at that time, the board determined that it was best to put a time limit on allowing a group to establish a church within a school out of concern that they might get sued for violating the First Amendment's Establishment Clause. Also, I can tell you what was driving that decision then was behavior of some churches, not all, in how they approached the community surrounding the church. And specifically, I think there was a church that was functioning as a church in a Norfolk public school that handed out flyers and things from the school on Sundays that some people felt were anti-Semitic or something like that. At any rate, I'll be glad to take a look at the law and see what the status is now. But that's where the idea came from, that there would be a hard limit just on religious groups who are going to establish literally a church in a school building, not on religious groups to use school property for other religious purposes, fundraisers or what have you. So that's how that came about. And like I say, that was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and it's been the rule ever since. And I know that this isn't the first time that a church group has been told that they have to exit the building because their time is up.
Okay.
Which doesn't mean, my recommendation would be, let me look at the law and see, there might be, it might be that the board would consider revising the policy. I would not make ad hoc exceptions to a policy.
Okay.
But it may well be within the law, depending on the wishes of the board, to increase the deadline for all churches to 3 years, for example, or 4 years. Just bearing in mind that the rule for one is the rule for all. And it's not really just a rule for churches, it's a rule for all types of religious facilities, mosques, or what
So
have
if we were to make an exception, that exception would then have to apply to everyone.
It gets us into.
I would recommend not making exceptions on an ad hoc basis,
Yeah.
because then every
Okay, I see
religious
why.
group
Yeah.
is going to come to the board and ask for an exception. And how are you going to make a principal
Right.
distinction between
So,
between
I
them?
mean, it's
All right, I
something
see,
that
I
we have
understand what
to.
you're saying.
But what I am saying
So-
is possibly the policy could be changed.
Either that or have them go to a different school.
Well, either, I appreciate your feedback, Mr. Cloud. I would definitely say that before then any decision is even asked of the board, that we receive your input and then we can take it from there. Okay.
Just for clarity, what's the policy that this is not the facilities use?
Community
Yes.
use.
Yes, it
Okay.
is.
So
It is.
just remember, and I know Dr. Gabriel, I think, Ms.
was
Basine,
there, yeah.
we went through a whole lot of change. We changed the fees and all that kind of stuff, so that was no.
That was a big task.
Yeah, and we also had public hearings when we did that, so I just want to
Yep.
keep that in mind.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, we have had a very robust, one more, oh yes, sorry, one last item. Ms. Campson is going to give
It's
us
gonna
a
be
very
fast.
brief update on our superintendent search, very brief.
Right, I know I've been keeping the board members informed, but since we have a public meeting, I'd like to just.
I have something to add to that, too. I just heard a few minutes ago, after you've spoken.
Am I going to
It's
be
good
sorry?
news. No.
Is it about the policy or this, or the
It's
search?
about the law as far as superintendent searches go.
Oh.
The Department of
okay.
Education.
Well, anyway, I asked,
Okay, Ms. Kamsey, go
I
ahead.
requested that I could do this briefly at the end of each meeting, and actually, interestingly enough, Mr. Jordan actually emailed me afterwards and said, why aren't you doing this? And I thought, yeah, that's what we should be doing, because we're moving. So to say it briefly, what's happened is, we spent September putting out a bid for the, whatever that's called. The bids, to have the firms apply and send us a big booklet about what they would do if we hired them to help us with the superintendent search. As soon as they came in, all members got those, and we spent tons of time going through it. I asked the members to bring back the two that they were most comfortable with, that they thought were the strongest. Every single board member picked the same two. And then we had a good, long discussion of comparing those two, and the board had a vote, and we all agreed on who we picked. And so then immediately, a contract was offered and signed, and on the 18th of September, we had our consultants come in and work with us and kind of get us started. And they'll be back 3 more times. And so then we move right into, because we were trying to get this all going as quickly as possible, the board then moved into the plan of where we were going, and we spent October planning. The brochure's being created that goes to applicants so they can get more information. Flyers is coming out, I hope, by the end of the week. All this is happening, so that we will be able to get that out. And I wanted to say very quickly to everyone that there will be stakeholder meetings. You'll see those on the flyers. The flyers will be placed immediately on the website as soon as we get them. They're provided by our search firm, and they will be sent to the schools. They'll be posted all over the schools. We'll be sending them out en masse, probably home with the children. Anything we can do to make everyone aware that there will be 3 days, an afternoon, a full day, and another morning session, so that at 3 different spots in the city, you'll see that we have open community meetings. We have meetings throughout the day. You can certainly go to any meeting that you choose to, but some are designated for principals to attend, or teachers to attend, or PTAs, or whatever. So that's all coming in October. And so just wanted to let you know that the job was posted October 1st, right on schedule. That went out yesterday in the posting. It's being advertised in the areas that were included in our contract, and then the board also decided to add some advertisements that we would be paying for in the 2 areas that our consultants recommended that we use, because they get the highest exposure and the most responses back. So that's basically where we are. We're right on track. At the end of each, I know I'm talking fast. She's laughing at me. I usually talk fast. So that's where we are at this point. So right now, our next big thing is to be marking your calendars, everyone. We'll be meeting in the afternoon on the 21st at Booker T. There'll be meetings there, and you'll see those on the flyer. We'll be then moving to another section of the town on Tuesday, the 22nd, all day at Norview High School, and you'll see these all listed. But remember, they're all public meetings. We tried to put them with different stakeholder groups that would come with a common idea, but they're all open to anybody. Wednesday morning, we will have leaders of the city, of philanthropic associations, of businesses, communities, civic leagues, everyone, and we'll have the leaders of those areas. We'll actually get an invitation. Doesn't mean you can't still walk in. Nothing. Anybody that can come to anything. This board is committed to getting as much input from stakeholders as possible. And when we move on further into starting to make some selections in December, we'll be bringing leaders of these stakeholder groups in to give us more feedback. So it's built in to get as much input and feedback, so this is a community decision. And so each time I'll update you, hopefully not quite so fast, to let all of our public know where we are. October 21st, 22nd, 23rd, everyone. On each of those days, there will be just a general community meeting in addition to special stakeholder groups. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I was just going to add, the law regarding superintendent's vacancy has always been that a school board has to report the vacancy. If they haven't filled it within that time to the state superintendent 120 days from the vacancy and explain what the steps they've been taking to fill it. And then it used to be that the ultimate outside deadline was 180 days from the vacancy. However, the law has been changed, and there was some equivocal language in the statute such that I contacted the superintendent of schools, which is the entity.
At my request, I had him searching
makes
for
the
this stuff.
decision.
I said, I need some clear direction here.
And they've actually indicated to me now, and earlier today, I can forward the email to the board, that their interpretation of the law is that now, as long as you ask for it within the 120 days, or actually, they don't even require that, just as soon after 120 days as you can do it, you can get a 180-day extension, which means essentially the time you have to get a new superintendent has been doubled, from 180 to 360 days. And if you ask for the extension, they have to give it to you. The statute says they shall give it to you if you ask for it. So you have up to 360 days within which to hire a superintendent. Now, after that, the Board of Education steps in and hires them for you. At least that's what the statute says, that they shall hire a superintendent for a division. That doesn't meet that deadline. But you do have twice as long as you had the last time you had to deal with those superintendents.
And we are on a schedule to finish it within the 180 days, but we do have that option, and we may decide to, that'll be a board decision, to request it in case, once we get our finalists in, we don't make a decision. But the longer you go until the springtime, the less your choices become, and you could end up, Suffolk's over there, they still have an interim in.
Yep.
All right, so
So
we're talking.
We're not having a discussion, this is just an update
So
to the dates.
I do have a question. So one, I appreciate the clarification, because I was raising that as we were working on the timeline. Can you just, I was traveling last week and there was some discussion going on around confidentiality of the search. So what was resolved? What is it that that we're doing in regards to finalists being displayed and board being able to access anyone who applies, the information on anyone who applies?
I can answer that, because actually the board voted on the second item you said, which was anybody looking at, any board member looking at all the applications that came in. For the second one, the board has not made a decision. I personally would like to see the finalists announced, because I'd like to bring, they're here for their interviews, I'd like to bring them around, but I can't make that decision myself. That'll go to the board for a vote again.
So when did the board vote on the other one?
The board didn't vote, but the input that was given to Ms. Campson about whether or not you would like to have the all the disclosed candidates.
I said all this in an email.
I said I was traveling, so if I missed it, I apologize.
So the majority of the board said that no, we did not want to have all of the applicants disclosed to us, that we preferred that we follow the recommendation of the search firm and stick with the semifinalist information that they give us, and then go from there. And if we want to, if we're not happy with the semifinalist list, that we can go back to that other pool, but to keep confidential, which we would be keeping confidential, but to keep all of from us, all of the applicants that apply.
Right.
That's what the majority of the board wanted.
And the search firm strongly recommended that, because it would have to be mentioned in anything that goes out, and it lessens the pool of applicants. And
So
that's their research, and reporting to you, they're the experts.
Okay, but I have some confusion around what our contract says. So I've tried to highlight this multiple times. So as I understand and read the contract that we've entered into, all of the names of the applicants are provided to the board. Is that correct?
I don't recall that. I thought that was a call we made.
That's what I highlighted that in the contract for you all. I need to get some clarity on that.
So then we can talk about that offline then. I'm happy to do that, to make sure that you're clear on that. But as I understand it, it is not.
But either way, the will of the board, and we can do a formal vote if you'd like.
No. I'm trying to get clarity on two things. There's according to the contract as I read it, that we entered into, anyone who applies for the search, we get the name. Then the firm goes through a process and they provide us with a group of semifinalists. When they provide us with the group of semifinalists, we receive full application packages of those 5. So we get names of everyone, and then we get background information on a group of semifinalists. And I mean, you all are shaking your heads, but
Mr. Jordan, Mr. Jordan, both Dr. Carroll and Dr. Fairby were very clear, and it's probably, we could go back and revisit the video when that came up during that last meeting we had with them, that they do not give out that information if the board unless the board requests it, and if that happens, then they have to change all the literature to reflect it so that people are aware, because a lot of people are like, oh, interesting, I might throw my hat in, but it's not something that they want to go back and inform their employers about, and so it cuts the feel.
Very happy to.
So just for the record, I think it's important sometimes to be able to have these work sessions. The page that I was on, 28, the paragraph was review candidates with the board and assist board members in determining which candidates they will interview. It
Right,
said,
that's at the semifinalist level.
let me read as I have it. The consultants will present a complete list of applicants who completed the application process to the board for its review. We do not eliminate any applicants. So I interpreted that as any applicant who applies, we get a list of those applicants. And then it says, however, a short list will be submitted of those applicants who we found most closely met the district's criteria. So then there's a short list. The consultants will present a reference profile demonstrating the consistent feedback for each short list applicant. So as I read that, we get a list of all applicants, the names. We then get a short list, and then with the short list, we receive a reference profile demonstrating the consistent feedback for each short list applicant. And the reason I kept raising it is, if we're going to get a list of names of all the applicants anyway, we're always responsible for being confidential. But by having the board having access to the full pool, yes, we're always going to consider what the consultant recommends, but it's still our search. So we would have the opportunity if the board for some reason felt that there was a candidate that we wanted to get more background on, that the consultants didn't think matched it, that's still within our purview. That's where I was trying to get clarity on that piece. And then the second piece was when we were going through the discussion around choosing a firm, we had some concerns about the parade piece, whether or not let's say it's a finalist of 3, whether or not we would reveal to the public who those final 3 were, and then take them around at meetings. So what I was trying to communicate to the board, from my perspective, if we're going to parade the final 3, then we would let folks know up front, because then you no longer have confidentiality throughout the entire search. That's what I've been trying to communicate and get clarity on.
And let me talk to Dr. Carroll again, and I'll make sure that this is added to the discussion for the November meeting. Whether or not what we're doing with all of that. I know that the last superintendent search, the finalists were not announced. It was not public. And there were a lot of unhappy people about that, which is why I feel that I support having the finalists listed, but I would go with the will of the board on that. And that would affect how the interviewing is done. And that will be a big discussion that comes at the November meeting when we will be meeting with the.
Context, I thought, was what we were advertising.
I understand what you're saying.
If we're advertising that we're going to have the finalists' names revealed to the public, that then impacts your candidate pool.
I understand
That's what I want us to make sure we understand.
So then this is what we need to do. Outside of our work session right here, we need to clarify that piece in the contract, okay, number 1, because I mean, I felt very confident with what I heard them saying, which is why they had Mr. Cloud go back and look at the FOIA stuff. So we need to clarify that. And then to your point, Mr. Jordan, we definitely need to make sure that we are clear as a board how we feel about the latter question. But I don't want to keep staff member here while we, have that discussion. So let's agree to have that conversation offline very soon, and then we will come back to it and we'll put that out to the board, okay? Is that?
Personally, I'm not comfortable with that because I think we've done that. I mean, I'm fine that that's what we're going to end up doing, but I just think that we've gone around this, and my recollection, when we were going through the process of the selection, that we called people to verify this, and I thought this is what we were trying to get clear on. And I can just tell you, for me, the response that we got then impacted my vote on the selection. So if it's changed, I just want to be clear so I have an understanding as a board member what we're doing.
And I'll call, Dr. Carroll is in Baltimore now, working with another district. I guess he's working with
If they could just send us an email clarifying it, that'd be fine.
And I will, yeah, hopefully. But I'll send him an email. I was going to send him an email about some other things tomorrow anyway. I won't be able to get him on the phone while he's obviously meeting and working with the other district. But I will send him an email and let him know this has arisen and that we need to have a response that I can then share with the board immediately, hopefully by tomorrow night. As you know, I get it out to you as soon as when I know, you know. So, which is how I got the letter out a little too fast that I forwarded. So if that would be okay, I'll have your answer back hopefully for you by tomorrow evening with some clarification.
All right. Adjourned.
Thank you.